Good evening. If you found your way here tonight, maybe your day's been long. Maybe your mind is still racing a little. Or maybe you just need a voice in the quiet. So, breathe. Let the world slow down, just for a while. Tonight, I'll take you deep into a forest where time doesn't move the way it should. Where someone who wanted to disappear found something that had been waiting. This isn't a story to scare you. Not really. It's a soft tale of silence, of memory, of the kind of hunger that lives under roots and breathes with the trees. So, curl up. Let your eyes grow heavy. And if the woods call to you in your dreams tonight, just remember, not everything that's quiet is safe.
The ride that turned deadly. Welcome back to another quiet night. If you're already in bed, lights off, headphones in, then this time is just for you. Maybe today was heavy. Maybe your thoughts are still spinning. That's okay. You don't have to try to relax. Just let this steady voice carry you slowly away from it all. Inhale nice and slow, and exhale gently. Everything around you is quieting down. The only thing left now is your breath and this story. Tonight, we'll take a ride. Just two people, one car, and a secret the night has been waiting to reveal. Let's begin. I started my shift at 10 p.m. as usual. That night was colder than most, but the city was calm in that familiar way only late-night drivers truly know. Streetlights casting soft golden halos, reflections gliding across wet pavement. I turned on the app, adjusted my seat, zipped up my jacket, and waited for the first ping. While waiting, I usually let quiet jazz play in the background. Not to relax, but to fill the space that silence creates when you're alone for too long. The app pinged, a ride request. Pickup location, the old downtown. I tapped accept and pulled out. But something felt off this time. Like I wasn't driving toward a passenger, but toward something I should never have found. I told myself, it's just the cold. But the things that whisper, not scream, those are the ones you should listen to. I arrived, a quiet corner near an abandoned building. No one on the sidewalk. No lights from nearby homes. Just my headlights sweeping over broken brick and shivering bushes. I gave a soft honk. 1 minute passed. Then, from the shadows, a man stepped out. Tall, thin, wearing a long black coat, hood low over his face. I could only see a pale jawline and a gray stubbled chin. He didn't greet me, didn't nod. Just opened the back door, got in, and closed it softly. I glanced in the rear-view mirror. His eyes were fixed on mine. "Good evening," I said, trying to sound casual. "Headed to Oakwood Avenue, right?" He nodded, slowly. The ride began. I nudged the music up a bit to cut through the silence. But the quiet in that car, it had weight. Like it was sitting beside me. I checked the mirror again. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at the empty seat beside me. That was when I realized this wasn't just any passenger. This was someone who knew they were in the right place. And I was driving exactly where they wanted me to go. We rolled along streets I'd driven hundreds of times. But tonight, they felt unfamiliar, like someone had rearranged the world just a little. Every streetlight blinked past like a heartbeat, steady, steady, then slower. Not because the car slowed, because he was tilting his head slightly at each post, as if counting them. I glanced again. This time, he wasn't watching me. He was watching the front passenger seat. I tried to ignore it, but when I reached the ramp for the highway toward Oakwood Avenue, he spoke for the first time. No, not that way. I paused, my hands on the wheel. Excuse me. He leaned forward, voice soft, like air slipping through cracks. Turn left. Take Old Birch Road, then Hollow Lane. I swallowed. Old Birch was narrow, dark, long abandoned after too many accidents. I wanted to say no, but his voice cut through. Trust me, I've lived around here a very long time. I said nothing, just tightened my grip and turned. The road narrowed into a black ribbon between twisted trees. No lines, no lights, just 2 rows of dead trunks and fog thick like breath. The music had stopped, sometime without me noticing. The app screen was now blank, no map, no destination. I tapped it, no response. He leaned back again, eyes closed as if resting. How old are you? He asked softly. 33, I replied, hesitating. And your mother? Is she still well? I froze. I don't remember mentioning my mother. He chuckled, not loud, but long, a hollow sound, like laughter echoing down a hospital hallway after everyone's gone home. You didn't, he said. I just remembered. My chest tightened. The car kept moving, but the world outside no longer felt like it was passing. It was as if the same trees, the same shadows, were looping over and over again. I asked, "Who are you?" No reply, just his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the glass, like a lullaby in reverse. I sat where you're sitting once, he said, thought I was in control, but every wheel eventually slips. I didn't understand. I wasn't sure I wanted to. I know where you went to school, who you loved. That time you forgot your own name, waking up in that hospital years ago. I slammed the brakes. The car skidded on damp gravel, sliding slightly sideways. He didn't flinch, just looked into the mirror again. And his eyes were no longer eyes. They were what used to be eyes. Want to know why you picked up this ride? He asked. I said nothing. Because you've been running. But you're not fast enough for what's chasing you. I threw open the door and bolted into the dark. I didn't care where I was going. Only that if I stayed one more minute, I'd lose more than my life. I ran through the black, my feet hitting wet leaves, my breath ragged and loud. The road felt endless, the forest pushing in from both sides. The branches seemed to lean closer, listening. My heart pounded in my ears. I didn't dare look back, partly because I didn't want to see him, and partly because I wasn't sure it would still be him anymore. I stumbled, hit the ground. Gravel scraped my palms, cold and wet. I pushed myself up, gasping. Then, I heard footsteps. Not running, walking, measured, unhurried. You're tired, His voice floated between the trees. You can't outrun yourself. You know that, right? I turned, nothing. But his voice was now at my ear. I spun again. My car was ahead. Headlights on. Driver's door ajar. And there he stood. Back to me. Still. Waiting. I should have run the other way. But somehow, I took a step forward. Come, he said. Not a command. Not a plea. Just fact. I walked closer. My limbs no longer my own. He sat on the roadside grass, patting the spot beside him. I didn't sit. He pulled a small box from his coat, opened it. Inside were photos, old yellowed, torn at the edges. One of them was me, taken from behind, wearing exactly what I wore that night. I stepped back. Why? He looked up, eyes dark as water at midnight. You left someone here years ago. No, I said. I've never remembered, he corrected. But part of you always knew. And the forest remembers everything. He took out a knife. Didn't point it. Didn't wave it. Just held it, looking at the blade under the pale moonlight. I don't need your fear, he said. I need you to remember. Because the hunger here, it doesn't feed on flesh. It feeds on silence. I woke up to daylight. No man. No car. No photos. Just me, lying on the road. Knees scraped. Hands aching. Air sharp and cold. A police cruiser pulled over. The officer asked if I was okay. I nodded, but I wasn't sure. Nothing hurt, but something felt missing. Back home, everything seemed normal. But the car I'd driven the night before, gone from the system. The app showed no rides, no history. I told friends. They laughed. Said I dreamed it, or maybe worked too late. But weeks later, I received a small envelope. No return address. Inside was a photo of me, standing in front of my house, taken from a distance. Date stamp, today. On the back, scrawled in shaky handwriting, you can't run forever. When the night falls again, I know the faster route. If you've stayed with me until now, maybe you've had your own long night. The kind where silence feels too deep. This story isn't just about a stranger or a strange ride. It's about the things we forget, and the places that don't forget us. Sleep well tonight, and if you hear a soft knock, don't turn around too quickly. The town that knew too much. I never thought I'd end up living in a small town. The city, with all its noise, chaos, and pressure, was familiar. Claustrophobic, yes. Exhausting, yes. But at least I knew how to survive in it. I knew the rhythm of honking horns, tight deadlines, and the blurry sense of purpose. I wasn't alone in that crowd. Then one day Dan, my husband, turned to me and said, "We need to leave. As soon as we can." I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy. We were both drained. After a second miscarriage and too many nights Dan came home late, I knew, if something didn't change, we'd break for good. And more than anything, there was Ellie. Our daughter, 6 years old, quiet, gentle, sensitive to things most children would never notice. She'd often wake up crying at night, unable to explain what had scared her. Psychologists said she was overly sensitive. I never believed that. Something was frightening her. I just didn't know what. So we began searching for somewhere new, somewhere quieter, greener, with trees, maybe a little town park, kind neighbors, a place where Ellie could sleep through the night. I found it almost by accident, on a forum I'd never visited before, Meadow Hollow. The name sounded like it was pulled from a storybook. Its website was outdated, low-resolution images of red maple trees, white fences, and a simple wooden swing set in an empty playground. Dan looked at the screen and said, "Looks peaceful." We drove there one weekend to take a look. The moment we crossed into town, we both fell silent. Not because we were tired, but because something felt off. The air was clean, the streets pristine, but there was no sound, no birds, no voices, no breeze, just the hum of our tires against freshly laid asphalt. I remember I said, "Why is it so quiet?" Dan chuckled. "Quiet's good. I've been craving quiet for years." The house we bought sat at the end of Pine Street, right at the edge of the woods. 2 stories, yellow paint, a small porch, and a big backyard. The price was far below market, at least 30% less. When I asked the previous owner why, he said, "My family had to leave quickly. But this house? It's good. The community's close-knit." He said close-knit with a strange half-smile, half-joke, half-warning. The day we moved in, the sky was overcast. Ellie sat in the back seat clutching her stuffed bear, staring out the window in silence. As we pulled up to the house, 3 people were already waiting outside. An elderly woman with white hair, a tall man in a hat, and a middle-aged woman in a floral dress holding a pie. All 3 were smiling, all at once. "Welcome to Meadow Hollow," the old woman said. "I'm Mrs. Geller. I live on your left." "Ray," the man added curtly. "I'm Laurie. I run the flower shop down the street. So nice to have you here." Dan shook their hands. I nodded politely, but I noticed something odd. None of them blinked. They just stared, smiling. That first day, everything seemed fine. We got the usual welcome gifts: pie, cider, a little booklet titled 101 Small but Important Rules in Meadow Hollow. I skimmed it. The first few were normal. Don't leave trash out overnight. Keep your lawn neat. No mowing on Thursdays. But one rule made me stop. Do not leave windows open after 9 p.m. I asked Dan, "Isn't that weird? Why not open windows at night?" He shrugged, adjusting the new ceiling light. "Probably bugs. You're overthinking." I closed the booklet, set it aside. That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. I sat by her bed, brushing her hair, humming softly. When she finally drifted off, I kissed her forehead and closed her door. On my way back down the hall, I noticed light spilling from the living room. I was sure I'd turned it off. I went downstairs. The window was open, curtains gently swaying. Outside, it was pitch black. No moon. No street light, just trees. I walked over, slowly closed the window, locked it, and turned off the light. But before I turned around, I felt it. Someone had just left. Seconds ago. The next morning, Ellie gave me a drawing. She always drew, but this one was different. A black background, our house in the middle. Surrounding it were figures. No faces, no hands. Just shadowy silhouettes standing, facing inward. I asked, "Who are these?" Ellie looked up, completely calm. "They're our neighbors. Don't you see them standing outside at night?" I forced a smile. "That must have been a dream, sweetheart." She didn't smile back. "It wasn't a dream. You should look outside around 3 o'clock." I didn't answer. That night, I stayed up late pretending to watch TV. At 2:56 a.m., I turned off all the lights, quietly climbed the stairs, went to the bedroom window. Outside, under the dull amber streetlight, stood 4 people, perfectly still, saying nothing, just watching our house. I slowly drew the curtain shut, reached for my phone, tried to take a picture. Storage error. Then black screen. Then restart. 3 a.m. I peeked out again. No one there. Only fog and the trees unmoving. I couldn't sleep deeply after that night. It wasn't exactly fear. More like a constant sense of something hovering just beyond the walls, behind the windows, between the curtains. Not loud, but not gone either. I started paying closer attention to things I had previously brushed aside, especially the small booklet our neighbors gave us when we arrived, 101 Small but Important Rules in Meadow Hollow. At first, I skimmed it out of politeness, but now I read each page carefully. And I realized it wasn't a collection of helpful neighborhood tips. It was a warning, coded, disguised. Page 17, do not hang white clothes outside during crescent moons. Page 26, if you hear your name called from the edge of the woods, do not respond, even if the voice sounds familiar. Page 41, never step into a neighbor's home unless you've been invited 3 times, even if the door is open. I stared at the page and felt cold creep into my spine. I showed it to Dan. He chuckled. "Someone has a weird sense of humor," he said. I didn't find it funny. One morning, while organizing books in the living room, I noticed Ellie quietly drawing at the kitchen table. She was completely absorbed, focused on red and black swirls, twisting like tree roots. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" I asked. She looked up and replied plainly, "Our house, but from outside." I frowned. "But you didn't leave the house yesterday." Ellie paused for a moment, then said softly, "I didn't go outside. I was with them." My breath caught. "With who?" "The people that stand around our house every night," she said. "They said next time they'll show me the basement." Dan had been working from home since we moved in. He claimed it was easier to focus here. He was calmer, more productive, more settled. But he also spoke less, reacted less. It was like he was present, but not entirely. At dinner, Ellie would talk about school, how her classmates were kind, her teacher gentle. But whenever she mentioned the town, something in her voice shifted. like she was reciting something memorized. "Here, everyone follows the rules," she said one night. "Here, no one yells. Here, no one does anything wrong." I looked at Dan, expecting a comment, maybe a joke. He said nothing, just chewed his food slowly, staring at nothing. That night, I dreamt I was standing in our backyard. Figures surrounded me, tall, thin, heads tilted slightly to the side. They didn't speak. Their eyes were closed. But I heard a voice inside my head. Not male, not female. The time has come. One enters, one leaves, to maintain balance. I woke up gasping, covered in sweat. The clock blinked, 3:12 a.m. I went downstairs for water. As I reached the kitchen sink, I froze. Something outside, just beyond the trees, slipped away. Not a person, not an animal. It moved like smoke, but it had shape. The next day, I went to the town library, one of the few places that still felt normal. It was small, one-story, and usually empty. The librarian was a white-haired woman with thick glasses. She smiled when I entered, but said nothing. I picked up a few books on child psychology and settled at a table by the window. A few minutes later, someone sat across from me. A woman in her 40s. Brown hair tied back. Gray shirt, quiet eyes. "You're new, aren't you?" she asked in a hushed voice. I nodded. "Yes. End of Pine Street." She didn't give her name, just leaned closer and whispered, "Have you heard the footsteps on your roof yet?" I blinked. "What did you say?" She looked around, then lowered her voice even more. "They walk at night, usually near the full moon. It's not loud, but if you hear someone call you from the back door, don't open it." Chills raced down my spine. I tried to ask more, but she stood abruptly and left. Before going, she slid a folded paper across the table. Inside, handwritten in black ink, "Don't stay past the third moon. They begin the ritual then. New families are always at the center." I didn't tell Dan. A few days later, he said, "People here are really kind." Ray invited me to help paint his fence. Afterward, he gave me homemade wine. I forced a smile. "Don't you think they're a little too similar?" "Similar?" he asked. "They're just neighbors. I don't see the problem." I let it go, but I began observing more closely. They wore similar clothes, gray or moss green. They walked in the same direction every morning, precisely at 7 o'clock. They mowed lawns on the same day. They never used phones outside. And most unsettling, they stopped whatever they were doing whenever I walked by. No greeting, no smile, just staring. 12 days in, I woke again in the middle of the night. No sound, no knock, no footsteps. But when I entered Ellie's room to check on her, I froze. Her window was slightly open, and on her desk, another drawing. A circle. Inside it, 3 figures. One of them tied to a chair. At the bottom, written in a child's shaky hand, "Next time, it's Mommy." The next morning, Ellie didn't go to school. She woke up with bloodshot eyes, pale skin, and hands like ice. I asked her if she was okay. She looked at me and said quietly, "They came last night. They touched my forehead. Now I know." I crouched down. Know what? She gave a smile I'd never seen on her before, then whispered, "I don't need to be scared of you anymore, Mommy, because soon I'll go farther than you." I froze. Dan entered the room just then, but instead of reacting, he placed a gentle hand on Ellie's shoulder and said, "It's all right, sweetie. Everything is going exactly as it should." I turned to look at him. His eyes were dull, cloudy, empty of warmth. "What are you talking about?" I snapped. "We're staying here, aren't we?" Dan asked, voice flat. "Everyone wants us to stay. Our family was chosen." I didn't reply. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That night, I waited until both of them were asleep. I slipped out of the house with nothing but a flashlight and the strange pounding feeling in my chest that I was about to discover something I could never unsee. I needed to know. I needed proof. I walked past silent homes, each one dark, each one shut tight like a stage set after a show. No porch lights, no barking dogs, no whispers, only stillness. I stopped in front of Mrs. Geller's house, the first neighbor we'd met. The back door was slightly open. There was no reason for that door to be open at midnight. I stepped forward, stopped, waited, then entered. Inside, everything was unnaturally tidy. No dust, no clutter, no signs of actual life. It didn't feel like someone lived here. It felt like someone maintained it, like a dollhouse that needed to look real from the outside. I made my way downstairs. The smell of mildew and old iron filled the air. A single yellow light bulb swayed slightly from the ceiling. In the center of the basement was a small sealed room. Its walls were stone. On them, pinned carefully, were dozens of hand-drawn maps. Each map showed our neighborhood. Each house was marked with the names of previous families, names written in dark red ink, and beneath each name a note, taken on the third moon, replaced by. I scanned down the list until I found our address. Right beneath it, my name, Claire D. Confirmed for ritual night, transfer not yet completed. Next to it was a series of overlapping circles and symbols I didn't recognize, an open eye within twisted roots. I reached out. My fingers trembled as I touched the paper. I was looking at a list, not of residents, but of replacements. I pulled out my phone and tried to take pictures. Nothing saved. When I tried to record video, the phone shut off instantly. I turned to leave but spotted a smaller room off to the side. Its door wasn't locked. Inside, a low altar, dimly lit by 3 small candles, and laid across it 3 photographs. Me, Dan, Ellie. Each one had a black slash drawn over the eyes. Under each photo, a carved symbol. In the middle of the altar, a handwritten note. New family stabilized. Ritual scheduled for the 29th, unless interrupted. My legs buckled. They hadn't been waiting for us to adapt. They had planned this from the beginning. I don't remember walking home. When I arrived, it was still dark. 4:10 a.m. Dan and Ellie were asleep, or at least still lying still in bed. I wanted to wake them, shake them. I wanted to scream, "We need to get out. Now." But I looked at Ellie. Her eyes were closed, but her lips were moving, murmuring something like a chant. I gently touched her shoulder. She stirred. When she opened her eyes, she didn't look at me. She stared up at the ceiling, smiled, and said, "They'll take you soon, Mommy. But don't be afraid. You won't be sad afterward." I wept, not like I had at the hospital, not like when I'd lost our first child. This time, I cried not from grief, but from the realization that my daughter was still alive, but no longer mine. I packed quickly, grabbed a bag, threw in what I could. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to go before the ritual. When I stepped downstairs, Dan was already at the door, holding the car keys, staring at me. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice flat. "I'm taking Ellie. We're leaving this place." "You don't need to do that," he said softly. "Stay. It'll be easier after the transfer. You'll understand." I clutched the suitcase tighter. He added, "Meadow Hollow doesn't force you to stay, but nowhere else will take you now." I didn't answer. I didn't say goodbye. I just ran. Through the darkness. Past the houses. Past the memories. Into the trees. The forest was wet, sharp, and cold. Branches scratched my arms, roots caught my feet. But I kept moving. I didn't dare look back. Because I knew, if I stopped, I'd never leave. I don't remember how long I ran. The only sounds were my footsteps, my ragged breath, and my heartbeat pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. The air felt thicker. The houses leaned in. Their windows stared back, dark and hollow. I passed a corner where Dan and I had sat the first week. I had told him, "I think we made the right choice." He'd nodded. And now? That memory was fading. The town was eating it. I tried my phone again. No signal. No map. Just one line flashing on the black screen. "There is nowhere else for you now." I dropped the phone. It didn't break. It just went dark. For good. I found the road that led out of town. The only road that connected Meadow Hollow to the rest of the world. But as I crested the hill, I stopped cold. They were waiting. Dozens of them. Lined across the road like a picket fence of flesh. Mrs. Geller, Mr. Ray, Lori, the mailman, the man from the hardware store, the woman who always smiled at the bakery, all standing, silent, still. They didn't move forward, but they didn't step aside either. I screamed, "Please, just let me take my daughter and go. I don't belong here." No reply, but I could see their eyes. Not angry, not cruel, just empty. Like everything inside had been quietly, carefully removed. I turned and ran back the way I came, toward the woods. Maybe I could find a gap through the trees, crawl through a ditch, find a back road. Even if I had to bleed, I had to try. Branches tore at me. Leaves stuck to my skin. The dirt sucked at my shoes. I reached a clearing, stopped, heaved for air. And behind me, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, I turned. Ellie stood there, alone, barefoot, pale. The moonlight touched her hair like silver dust. I took a step back. Ellie, baby, what are you doing out here? You weren't listening, she said softly. So they asked me to come instead. No, no, sweetheart, we're going now. I'm taking you away. Somewhere safe. She shook her head. There's nowhere else. You forgot, didn't you? Forgot what? That you asked for this, she said. A second chance. A place where there's no yelling, no sirens, no loss. You begged for it. I felt the air leave my lungs. This isn't what I meant. She smiled sadly. The town doesn't hear meanings. It hears what you say, and it gave you what you asked. Behind her, Dan stepped into the clearing, still in his pajamas, still barefoot, silent. Claire, he said, stop fighting. They didn't force anything on you. They answered. I'm not a request, I whispered. Dan stepped closer. You will remember. Soon. And you'll thank them. I ran again. I don't know where I was heading. I just ran until my legs gave out. Then I saw it, faint light in the distance. A gas station. The sign blinking weakly, open 24 hours. I bolted inside. A young woman behind the counter froze when she saw me. Mud-covered, breathless, wild-eyed. Please, I gasped. Call the police. I need help, please. She stepped around the counter, gently touching my arm. You came from Meadow Hollow, didn't you? My heart dropped. How do you know? She didn't smile. People who leave that place carry something. You can see it, hear it, smell it. I backed away. I left. I'm not going back. She didn't follow. You don't need to go back. It will come for you when it's ready. Until then, sleep where you can. But don't open your doors after 9. Don't hang white outside. And don't answer if someone calls your name from the dark. I left the gas station. The road stretched before me, dark and long. But I walked. I walked for hours. Days maybe. I don't remember. Now, I live somewhere else. 300 miles away. A small riverside town. There are people here. Children. Dogs. Laughter. Trees that lose their leaves. But I don't talk to anyone. I rent under a different name. I don't go online. I don't take photos. I live quietly. I never leave the window open after 9. I never hang white outside. And I never ever answer when I hear my name whispered from beyond the fence. Because I know. They still know where I am. And one day, when I finally forget why I ran, they'll knock again. Softly, kindly, just like they did the first time, when they smiled and welcomed me home.
I'm on a plane, on the way to my hometown to solve a mystery. A mystery that has been haunting me from a very young age. Let me to take you back so you can understand. I can still feel the grit of red clay under my fingernails when I think about it. Smell the sweet decay of hay in the barn. Hear the indignant squawks of chickens as we chase them around the pen. That old rooster, we called him Satan's alarm clock, would get so mad he'd turn purple under his feathers, pecking at our ankles until we scrambled over the fence like amateur acrobats. Looking back now, I realize that rooster taught us our first lesson about respect. Sometimes the smallest things can pack the meanest punch. I'm Matthew, Matt to most folks, and this is the story of how my brother Larry and I ended up on Grandpa Joe's cattle farm in the summer of 1992. We were city kids, soft-handed and Netflix addicted, until Grandpa's heart started giving out and Dad packed us up faster than a tornado warning. This farm's been in our family for 4 generations, he'd say, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight, his knuckles went white. You boys are gonna learn how to run it right. The transition hit us like a brick wall. One day we were racing bikes down suburban streets. The next, we were mucking stalls and learning how to milk cows with hands that blistered and bled. Our closest neighbor was old Mr. Peterson, 5 miles down a dirt road that turned to soup every time it rained. Those first few weeks, we were so lonely, we started naming the chickens. Each one, all 30 of them. We gave them soap opera names, like The Bold and the Beautiful and Days of Our Lives characters. Though keeping track of who was who became impossible once we realized chickens all look pretty much the same when they're running away from you. But kids are resilient, like weeds growing through concrete. We discovered that mud fights were better than video games, that building forts from hay bales beat any playground equipment, that the stars out there were so bright they made the sky look overcrowded. We learned the hard way about electric fences. Larry's hair stood on end for hours. About how mama cows don't take kindly to strangers near their calves. I've never run so fast in my life. And about why you should always, always check your boots for spiders before putting them on. Poor Larry hopped around on one foot for a whole day after that one. Dad taught us to shoot that first summer, starting with tin cans and working our way up to hunting. The first time I dropped a deer, I cried and threw up in the bushes. Larry just stood there, quiet-like, the way he always got when something big was happening. That day taught us about life and death in a way no video game ever could. We learned that food doesn't just appear in grocery stores, that taking a life means something, and that being tough isn't about not feeling. It's about feeling everything and still doing what needs to be done. We made plenty of mistakes that summer, like the time we decided to help by painting the barn with some old paint we found in the shed. Turns out it was primer, and rain washed it all away. Or when we thought we could ride one of the calves like a horse, spoiler alert, you can't. Each scrape, bruise, and close call was a lesson wrapped in an adventure. We learned about consequences, about taking responsibility, about the difference between brave and foolish. Though sometimes the line between the two was about as clear as mud. Everything changed when Dad remembered his old buddy Jim lived just over the county line with his 2 kids. The day we met them, the air was thick enough to chew, and the cicadas were screaming their summer symphony. I remember standing in their gravel driveway, Larry hiding behind me like a shadow. Funny thing he was, never scared of anything, besides meeting new people. "Hey, I'm Matt. This is Larry," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. John, looked at us like we were something that fell off a tractor. "I'm Jonathan. This is Missy." His sister was staring at me with these huge brown eyes, like she was trying to memorize my face. "You guys ever catch frogs?" The disgust on John's face was priceless. Why would anyone want to catch frogs? 'Cause they're slippery and fast and make funny noises when you poke them. Come on. Our property was huge. We all ran over to the creek, a few minutes from my house. We spent hours splashing through the creek, pants rolled up to our knees, hollering every time someone caught one of those slick little jumpers. John went from disgusted to determined after Larry caught a monster bullfrog. Missy would sneak up behind us, free our captives, then run away, shrieking with laughter, while we chased her through the tall grass. By the time the sun set, we were covered in mud, mosquito bites, and the kind of friendship that feels like it's always been there. Those summer days stretched out like warm taffy, each one filled with new discoveries. We learned how to tell which clouds meant rain was coming, how to whistle through a blade of grass, how to catch fireflies without crushing them. We figured out that sometimes the best conversations happen in complete silence, sitting on a fence post, watching the sun paint the sky in colors no crayon could match. And most importantly, we learned that growing up isn't something that happens to you. It's something you do. One scraped knee, one broken rule, one learned lesson at a time. That summer was the first time I heard anything about the White Woods. Larry and Missy were down in the creek, splashing around and collecting tadpoles in their plastic buckets, their excited voices carrying across the yard. I remember standing there in the tall grass, swatting at mosquitoes, when something caught my eye at the edge of our property. There, rising up against the deep green of the regular forest, stood a cluster of trees that looked wrong somehow. Their bark was bleached and pale, like sun-dried bones left too long in the desert. They formed a perfect wall. They were maybe a mile or so from our land, and something about the way they seemed to glow in the afternoon light made my stomach twist. I turned to John, who was sitting cross-legged in the grass beside me, furiously scratching at the constellation of bug bites on his arms. I smacked his hand away and pointed over to the site. "Hey, what's that over there? We haven't gone exploring in that part yet, have we?" John kept scratching, pretending not to hear me, like he usually did when he was in one of his moods. But when he finally looked up, his whole body went stiff. The color drained from his face, making his freckles stand out like dots of rust. Just stay away from those woods, okay?" His voice had that weird, grown-up tone he sometimes used when he was trying to act older than his 12 years. Kids aren't supposed to play there. How come? I pressed, suddenly more interested than ever. Anything that could spook my usually unflappable brother was worth investigating. People go missing in there. He picked at a blade of grass, not meeting my eyes. Like a lot of people. Yeah, but how come? I scooted closer, lowering my voice even though Larry and Missy were too far away to hear. John shrugged, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. Nobody knows for sure. At least that's what the cops say. Some folks think there's something in there, like a monster or whatever. Or maybe just some crazy person living out there, picking people off. Like Jason? I whispered, thinking of the horror movie Dad definitely didn't know we'd watched at our sleepover last week. Yeah, John said, finally looking at me with serious eyes. Maybe something even worse. Later that day, I asked my dad about it, and this is the response I got. Never go in, not even a step. There's things in there, he'd say, his voice getting quiet, like it did when he talked about Mom. Dangerous animals and stuff, all right. That was the most I got out of anyone for a while. 8th grade started that fall, and suddenly our little group was inseparable. Me and Larry joined football because John wouldn't shut up about it. Though basketball was our true love. Larry got picked on by some giants until he figured out how to use their size against them during tackling drills. He'd wait until they were charging full speed, then duck and roll at the last second, sending them face first into the mud. John and I would laugh so hard we'd get extra laps. After school, we would all go hang out at my house, but eventually my dad would complain about all the noise we would make. And sometimes we'd get bored of playing outside. That's when we found this spot in the town library, behind the encyclopedias where Mrs. Shank couldn't see us, where we'd read comic books and trade cards and plan our weekend adventures. When we weren't chasing each other with sticks and exploring the countryside, we were in the library. That's when the White Woods came up again. Larry and John were hunched over their new Pokemon cards in our usual library corner, trading whispers about rare hollows, while Missy was giving me a crash course in local history. Being from the city, I never really cared about where I came from. But small towns are different. People here actually get excited about this stuff. Maybe it's pride, or maybe they're just really, really bored. Hey, Matt, want to hear something weird? Missy's eyes lit up the way they always did before sharing some random fact. Hit me. I nodded, trying not to smile. Everyone else always shut her down when she got like this, which is probably why she kept coming to me. You know how everyone's always like, stay out of the White Woods. She leaned in closer. That's actually why this town exists in the first place. Now that got my attention. Wait, what? Yeah, according to this book, the founders were totally... She squinted at the page. Enamored, I finished, trying not to laugh. She punched my arm, hard enough to mean it, soft enough to be friendly. Know-it-all, she muttered. That's when Scott from the football team poked his head around the bookshelf. We weren't like enemies or anything, but we weren't exactly hanging out at lunch either. You guys talking about the White Woods? His voice had that trying to be casual tone that meant he was dying to say something. Missy rolled her eyes. No, we're discussing physics. Scott ignored her sarcasm and squeezed into our corner anyway. My dad swears there's monsters in there. Now that was the kind of small-town stuff I lived for. Coming from the city, where the scariest thing was probably the subway at 3 a.m., this was gold. For real? What kind? Skinwalker, Scott whispered, like the word itself might summon something. Dad heard it himself. Said it was making animal noises, but wrong. Like something pretending to be an animal. You know? Oh, please. I tried to sound unimpressed, but honestly, I was already hooked. If there was anything like that out there, don't you think someone would have gone all Monster Hunter on it by now? But I heard. John looked up from his Charizard. Scott, my man, no one wants to hear your kindergarten campfire stories. The thing is, I kind of did. I guess you could say this is when my obsession with the White Woods started. Mrs. Shank told us we ought to keep ourselves from talking about the White Woods. She seemed serious. Even now, when I look back on the memory, I can remember her harsh tone. At least as of that moment, my thirst for the unknown had been quenched. The oak tree on our farm became our sanctuary that summer. We climbed it one scorching afternoon, helping each other up until we found this perfect spot near the top where the branches made a natural platform. I pulled out Dad's pocket knife, the one he still doesn't know I borrowed, and we carved our names deep into the bag. Mine, Larry's, John's, and Missy's, all inside a rough heart. Now, we're all gonna be best friends forever, Missy declared. We had a million little adventures that year. Like the time we tried to ride one of the calves and ended up covered in more manure than cow. Or when we built a raft for the creek using old barrels and rope, only to have it sink the moment John stepped on it. We caught fireflies in mason jars, learned to whistle with grass between our thumbs, and once tried to teach a chicken to play fetch. His name was Professor Klux, and he was not a good student. The White Woods wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pale trees reaching toward the sky. I started asking questions at school, but people would just shut down. Teachers would change the subject. Students would suddenly remember somewhere else they needed to be. Their reactions only made it worse. Like picking at a scab, I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. John was the one who finally cracked. He might have been held back a year, but that kid was sharp as a tack when something caught his interest. We were all like that, I guess. Once we latched onto something, we'd follow it straight off a cliff if we had to. You're still hung up on the White Woods thing, aren't you? He caught me between classes, shoulders tense. Come on, you know how it is. The more people dodge my questions, the more I want answers. I tried to laugh it off, but John wasn't smiling. He grabbed my arm, pulling me aside. Listen, man, I'm telling you this as a friend. Let it go. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. My old man, he was a cop here before you moved to town. Started poking around about some disappearances near those woods. Something in John's expression made me queasy. What happened to him? died in a shootout. Only one we've ever had in this town. John's fingers dug into my arm. Funny timing, right? Started asking questions. Then suddenly, he trailed off, swallowing hard. Don't you want to know why? The words slipped out before I could stop them. I mean, if it was my dad. No, John cut me off. And for the first time since I'd known him, I saw real fear in his eyes. I don't. And that's the God's honest truth. He let go of my arm, but the weight of his words stayed with me. Looking at him then, I realized this wasn't just another ghost story. This was my friend, trying to protect me from something that still haunted him. Something that had torn a hole in his life that would never quite heal. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was up. You know that itch in the back of your mind when you just know there's more to the story? Yeah, that one. John and I had lunch together that day. Larry and Missy were stuck in a different period. It wasn't the first time we'd skipped, and it probably wouldn't be the last. There was this bathroom at the back of the school with a window that hadn't latched right since forever. One quick jump, and we were free. We wandered through town like we owned the place. The fall air had that perfect crispness to it. The kind that makes you feel alive. We talked about the usual stuff at first. How much homework sucked. How Mr. Peterson's history class felt like it lasted approximately 3 years. And how being 13 was basically the worst thing ever. Looking back now, those were some of the best days of my life. Just 2 kids with nowhere to be and nothing but time. But this time was different. John let something slip that would change everything. You guys ever show me all the cool spots around here? I asked, kicking a rock down the sidewalk. Feel like we must have missed something. John hesitated, scuffing his sneakers against the concrete. I mean, there's the Old Town well, but nobody really... My head snapped up. Well? What well? Forget it, he mumbled, suddenly super interested in his shoelaces. Come on, what? Don't be a wuss. I punched his arm, maybe a little harder than I meant to. He got me back just as good, and we both stood there, rubbing our arms like the idiots we were. Okay. He glanced around like someone might be listening. It's in the White Woods. Used to be this whole thing where kids would try to find it, like a dare or whatever. But then, he lowered his voice. This kid went out there, Jerry or something. When they found him 2 days later, he was totally messed up, like straight up crazy. Kept babbling about these tunnels under the ground and these things he saw. I felt my heart speed up. Wait. Isn't that exactly what Scott was talking about? The stuff his dad mentioned? Scott's full of it, John said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. But what if he's not? I stopped walking and grabbed John's sleeve. Think about it. What if there's actually something out there? We could be the ones to figure it all out. We'd be like those kids from the movies who solve the big mystery. John's face did this weird dance between excitement and terror. I don't know, man. Just imagine if we found something huge. Everyone would have to know who we are then. I knew I was pushing it, but I couldn't help myself. No more being the new kid, I added quietly. We stood there for a minute, just letting that sink in. Then I got that feeling, the one where you just know you're about to do something either really awesome or really stupid. My dad won't be home for hours. I said, "Come on." We ran all the way to my house, our backpacks bouncing against our backs. The whole time, my mind was racing with possibilities. Once we got there, I dug out my pocket knife I took from my dad, and we climbed up to my roof spot. From there, you could see the whole town, including the white woods looming at the edge like a dark wall. I watched John stare at the woods. He looked scared, but there was something else there too, like he wanted to be brave, but didn't know how. "We need to make this official," I said, flipping open the knife. "What are you... Oh my God. Matt, no!" John's eyes went wide as I drew the blade across my palm. It stung like crazy, and I tried not to show how much it hurt. "John," I said, trying to sound like the heroes in those old movies my dad loved, "you're my best friend. More than that, you're my brother now, and I swear, no matter what happens, I'll make sure you're okay, even if I have to get hurt instead. That's a promise." "You're insane," he whispered, but he was looking at me like nobody had ever offered to protect him before. His hand shook as he held it out. I made the cut as quick and shallow as I could, but he still yelped. When we pressed our palms together, it felt like something bigger than us was happening. John started crying. Not loud sobs or anything, just quiet tears that made me realize how much this meant to him. We spent the rest of the afternoon drinking Kool-Aid and playing video games, trying to act tough about our cut hands, even though they hurt like hell. When my dad got home, he went ballistic about us skipping school, but it was worth it. The next day in the town library, we brought it up to Larry and Missy. We were all crammed into our usual corner. "No way," Missy said immediately, shaking her head so hard her braids whipped around. "Absolutely not. Are you guys crazy?" Larry perked up, though, especially after John told the story about the missing kid. "What if he found something real?" Larry asked, leaning in close. "Like, what if there's treasure down there or something? Or what if he got eaten by whatever lives in those woods?" Missy shot back. "Come on, Missy," I pleaded. "We need you. You're the only one who actually knows how to read a compass." "Yeah, and you're way braver than any of us," John added. "That's exactly why I should stay behind and tell everyone where to look for your bodies." It took almost an hour of begging, promising, and straight-up manipulation before she finally cracked. "Fine," she exploded, throwing her hands up. "But only because you idiots would probably get yourselves killed without me." We spent the rest of lunch planning. John said he could swipe some spray paint from his dad's garage, the good kind that glows in the dark. I'd bring my knife and enough snacks to last us through the apocalypse. Larry would grab our dad's old flashlights from our barn, and Missy, still grumbling, agreed to bring her compass and the detailed map of the area she'd gotten from her scout troop. The plan was simple. Meet up at sunrise, when the light would be good enough to see, but early enough that no one would miss us. We'd head into the White Woods, find the well, and make history. None of us slept that night. How could we? The next day, we'd either be heroes, or we'd end up like Jerry, or whatever his name is, if he was even real. But sitting there in my room, staring at the bandage on my palm, I knew there was no backing out now. We had a blood pact, after all, and those things were sacred. At least, they were in the movies. Then came March 22nd, 1993, the day we went into those God-forsaken woods. The air was different that morning. Heavy, like before a storm, but the sky was clear enough to hurt your eyes. We walked through the long grass on our property. The white woods surrounded a part of it, but it was still about a 10 or 20-minute walk before you hit the wood. We wandered closer to the edge of the white woods than we usually dared. The encroaching feeling that we were about to do something that couldn't be undone, consuming us. It was too late to turn back. My fascination had taken over. Before I knew it, my feet were stepping on branches that snapped and cracked, and we were venturing into the white woods. Time went strange in there. The trees all looked the same, their white bark glowing faintly in the dim light. Their branches twisted and turned, like skeleton arms reaching out for us, trying to claim us and keep us here. We walked around for what felt like hours, but the sun hadn't moved in the patches of sky we could see through the canopy. The air got thicker, older somehow, like the stuff you breathe in abandoned houses. I was almost ready to call it quits and turn around, following the red X's John sprayed on the trees, but then heard it. A sound that made the hair on my arms stand up and my stomach turn to ice. It was like a goat's bleat, but wrong, like someone trying to imitate a goat while crying. Before any of us could react, Missy was running toward it, her blonde hair streaming behind her like a banner. Larry took off after her, calling her name. John and I looked at each other, and in that moment, we were just scared kids. We ran after them, branches whipping our faces, roots trying to trip us. The white woods had swallowed us whole. The bleating drew us deeper into the woods, each step taking us further from the safety of daylight that filtered through the canopy above. The sound was wrong somehow. Too human, too knowing. We found Larry and Missy at the edge of a clearing, their bodies rigid like deer catching a predator's scent. As we approached, I saw what had stopped them cold. A well, ancient and half swallowed by the forest. Gnarled trees had grown around it over decades, maybe centuries, their roots crawling over the stonework like possessive fingers, trying to drag it into the earth. That awful bleating echoed up from its depths, bouncing off the old stones until it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A rope stretched from the mouth of the well and stared into a perfect circle of darkness. Larry was already climbing down it. Missy followed. Something about the well's mouth made my vision swim, like looking into an optical illusion that refused to resolve itself. My stomach churned with a sickness that felt older than my body, older than the trees themselves. I wanted to follow Larry down. He was my brother after all. But my muscles had turned to water. The goat's cries grew more desperate, more human, until the rope suddenly went still in my hands. The silence that followed was worse than any sound I'd ever heard. "Larry!" My voice cracked. "Larry, are you okay?" Missy's scream shattered the air like breaking glass. It wasn't the kind of scream you make when you're startled. It was the sound of someone's mind trying to reject what their eyes were seeing. John's hands clamped down on the rope, his knuckles white with tension. He gave me one last look, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. A kind of desperate courage that knew it was about to die. Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness below. The rope played out through my trembling hands, feet after foot, until I couldn't see him anymore. The sounds that drifted up from below weren't natural. Wet shuffling and occasional groans that might have been human, but somehow weren't. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, but Larry was down there. My brother. I took one step toward the well, and my body revolted. Cold sweat broke out across my skin, and my vision tunneled. Even at 12 years old, I recognized this feeling for what it was. The same instinct that made our ancestors flee from shadows in the night, that taught us to fear what lurked in deep waters and dark caves. The rope jerked violently, and I stumbled backward. John emerged like a drowning man, breaking the surface, his arms scrabbling at the well's rim. He hauled himself out and turned to help Missy. But when they both stood before me, my heart stopped. No, Larry, the space where my brother should have been, yawned like an open wound. Missy's face was blank, wiped clean of everything that made her Missy. The rest of that night blurs at the edges, like a dream that doesn't want to be remembered. I remember fighting with John, begging him to let me go after Larry. The fear in my chest had hardened into something sharp and desperate. I knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that every second we waited was 1 second too many. But John grabbed my shoulders, spun me around, and pointed at Missy. "You see her?" His voice shook. "I don't know what they saw down there, but I've never seen her like this. We were just kids, sure, but Missy was the one who climbed trees to the highest branches, who once punched some bully for killing a frog with a rock. She went down that well, eager to save whatever was making those sounds. Now she stood there, trembling, her eyes fixed on something none of us could see. Whatever waited in that darkness had broke her. We ran. By the time we broke through to open ground, night had fallen completely. My father stood at the tree line, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, his face tight with worry that melted into relief when he saw us. Then he counted heads, and that relief curdled into something else entirely. What happened next plays like a series of disconnected snapshots in my memory. My father sitting us down, his voice stern but trembling, as he made us swear never to speak of what happened. Him disappearing into the darkness with a rope and flashlight of his own. The hours of waiting, each minute stretching like taffy. When he finally came back alone, something had changed in him too. I watched from the stairs as he poured himself drink after drink, muttering into his glass. Just once, I saw him smile, a terrible, knowing smile that belonged on someone else's face. "My boy," he whispered, "my boy made it to the room before me." I didn't understand what he meant then. Part of me hoped I never would. The years after Larry disappeared blend together like watercolors in the rain. I spent most of them in that old oak tree, staring into the woods until my eyes hurt, hoping against hope that my brother would just walk out. It's weird the way trauma can affect a person, isn't it? Specifically friendships. It either breaks or makes it right. You're so close together after having to depend on each other for survival. Or it puts a permanent brand on the friendship that is so vile that every time you think of that person, you can't avoid thinking of the event associated with that friendship. I guess that's what happened to our friendship. The event was so horrific in the context of real-life horror that we couldn't look past it. I spent 3 years pretty much alone. I had become an outcast. Sure, it seemed like I had given up on Larry, and maybe I had for a time there. But deep down, I always knew something greater than I could ever understand happened to Larry. And I knew if I didn't pursue it, no one would. I studied occult obsessively, but to no avail. I couldn't find anything about a well or a creature that resides in one. This only further pushed me, being an outcast. No one wants to talk to weird, quiet kid who's obsessed with ghosts and ghastly creatures. I got kind of used to it for a while there. John, Missy and me would pass each other in the halls, trade quick glances, but the weight of what happened kept us from really talking, at least until I was 16. I was hiding out in the library that summer, buried in textbooks. Maybe if I studied hard enough, I could forget. That's when I heard footsteps approaching my table. Matt, John's voice was barely above a whisper. He stood there awkwardly, hands shoved deep in his pockets, while Missy lingered a step behind him. I didn't look up. "What do you want?" "We miss you, man." John pulled out a chair, the legs scraping against the floor. "It's been forever." "Yeah, well, Dad made it pretty clear I'm supposed to stay away from you guys. Something about leading us into the White Woods." The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "That's not." John's face twisted like he'd tasted something sour. "You know that's not how it happened. Missy and Larry. Just say his name," I snapped, finally meeting his eyes. "Larry, my brother, the one we lost down there. Look, I'm not mad anymore, okay? But Dad's made up his mind." Missy stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "And you're just gonna let him control your life like that? Don't you think it's weird that he told us to keep quiet about Larry? About everything? Of course I thought it was weird. That question had been eating away at me for 3 years. But what was I supposed to do? Challenge my father? I'd been just a kid, convinced that following his rules meant being a good son. Now I was starting to see how thoroughly he'd gotten inside my head. We talked for hours that day, huddled in the back of the library where no one could hear us. When Missy finally told me what she'd seen down in that well, my whole world tilted sideways. No goat, no simple hole in the ground. Instead, she described a nightmare of tunnels spreading out like spider webs, pitch black and endless. She'd seen Larry being dragged into that darkness, his hand reaching back toward her. Something had tried to take her too, but Larry, my brave, stupid brother, had helped her fight it off. By the time John made it down, all he found was Missy sobbing at the bottom. The strangest part, John hadn't heard a sound. The goat, nothing. That's when the questions really started piling up. Why had Dad been so insistent about our silence? Why did he seem to age 10 years overnight after Larry disappeared? We decided to go to the police. Consequences be damned. The sheriff listened to our story with the kind of smile adults reserve for children telling ghost stories. Sure, people disappeared in the White Woods. That's why folks stayed away. But tunnels? Underground passages? Pure fantasy, he said. We must have sounded crazy, but we weren't suggesting anything supernatural. Maybe someone was living down there. Maybe that explained all the disappearances. We dug through old police reports and newspaper archives, looking for patterns. That's when things got really strange. Larry was an outlier. Most victims were adults, not children. But one case grabbed me by the throat and wouldn't let go. A man who'd vanished in the woods while with his son, Jeremy. The son came back, but he was never the same. He kept running away from his foster home, always heading back to the woods. The first mention of the well appeared in his file. Jeremy, redacted, age 14, found at the Old Town Well in the White Woods, catatonic. They'd locked him up in the local psychiatric hospital, a place I hadn't even known existed until then. Now, he was our parents' age, still institutionalized. But he had a sister, someone close to our age, but a little older. I tapped John's shoulder. Isn't this the kid you told me about a couple years back? You thought his name was Jerry. It's Jeremy. Really? Yeah, that kid sucks we can't talk to him, huh? Well, it says here he has a younger sister. She's about 20. John and I exchanged looks, a plan already forming. Missy saw it in our faces and started shaking her head before we could even speak. It took an hour of arguing and planning before she agreed to try talking to him. We'd wait outside, ready to jump in if anything went wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. Dad was in his usual spot by the window, bourbon in hand. rocking slightly as he stared into the darkness of the woods. The moonlight caught the silver in his hair. My heart was pounding as I approached him. "Dad," I said softly, "what really happened to Larry?" The words hung in the air like smoke. "What's in that well?" He turned just enough for me to catch his bloodshot eyes, then went back to his vigil. "So young," he murmured. "So many questions." Something inside me snapped. "You know something. You've known all along." The words came out in a rush, years of bottled rage spilling over. "My brother is gone, and you're just sitting here, drinking, doing nothing. You're supposed to be our father." I expected him to explode, to match my anger with his own. Instead, he seemed to collapse in on himself, shoulders sagging under an invisible weight. He took another long drink, his hand trembling. "You could never understand," he whispered, his voice cracking. "The choices I've made, it's all so much bigger than us, Matthew. So much bigger." He closed his eyes, looking ancient and broken. "Go to bed." That night, lying in my room, I felt different about Larry for the first time in years. Usually, thinking about him was like pressing on a bruise, a dull, familiar pain. But now I can almost hear him calling to me, his voice echoing up from somewhere deep and dark. "Help me. Come find me." In my dreams, I still hear it sometimes. The bleating of an unseen goat, and my brother's terrified screams fading into the blackness. But now I wonder if they're really dreams at all. We met at the oak tree just as the morning fog was lifting. The dew still clung to the grass, dampening our shoes as we huddled together, going over our plan one last time. The ride to the mental hospital felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the anticipation, or maybe it was just the summer heat beating down on us as we pedaled for what seemed like forever. An hour ride into town, just for it to slowly disappear behind us as we made our way up a winding hill, our legs burning with each push. Melancholy's Peak. That's what the sign said, or what was left of it anyway. The wood was rotting, letters barely hanging on, as if the place itself was trying to fade away from existence. It sat there at the top of the hill, like some forgotten castle, all brick and iron windows, watching over the town below. They'd built it up here on purpose, I figured. Out of sight, out of mind. We propped our bikes against the rusted fence. Missy's hands were shaking as she tried to smooth down her borrowed dress. She looked nothing like herself. More like someone playing dress-up, trying too hard to look proper. I'd never seen her so nervous. The following is Missy's recount. The smell hit me first, antiseptic mixed with something else, something older. The linoleum floors squeaked under my feet as I walked to the front desk, trying to channel every ounce of confidence I could muster. The woman behind the desk looked up, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. "Can I help you, dear?" My mouth went dry. "I'm here to see my brother, Jeremy. The name felt foreign on my tongue. I struggled to remember it at first. I'm Rachel. Her face lit up with recognition. Rachel! Oh, your voice! It's just like on the phone. I should have known it was you right away. My heart skipped. She'd bought it. Rachel had called before. I filed that away, trying to keep my voice steady. The nurse led me through winding corridors, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. He's been different lately, she said, her voice dropping, more agitated. Sometimes he talks about strange things. Just be prepared, okay? The door to his room looked like all the others. Heavy, institutional, with a small window at eye level. The nurse unlocked it, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. I'll be right out here. Just call if you need anything. The room was smaller than I expected. Maybe 8 by 8 feet. A bed with hospital corners. A window with privacy glass that turned the sunlight gray. The walls were bare, except for a few scratches. Marks from God knows what. And there, in the corner, was Jeremy. His eyes found me immediately. They weren't crazy eyes. That's what surprised me most. They were clear, alert, watching. Who the hell are you? His voice was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. I swallowed hard. Mr. Redacted, I'm so sorry to disturb you. I'm actually a student journalist. I'm working on a story and I wanted to ask you about the White Woods. The change was instant. His face darkened, like storm clouds rolling in. The White Woods? He let out a laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. What makes you think those woods are just some story? The myths, the legends. Myths. He stood up suddenly, and I fought the urge to bolt. I saw it. With these eyes. He tapped his temple. I saw the room. My skin prickled. The room? Say it like you mean it. He lunged for a stack of papers by his bed, scattering them across the floor. They were drawings, if you could call them that. Most were just frantic scribbles, but a few made my blood run cold. One showed a boy in a tunnel, a light at the end that wasn't just light. There were eyes above it, watching, waiting. Another showed the same boy kneeling before that light, but something was wrong with his shadow. It stretched the wrong way. A room isn't really a room, Jeremy continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. It's. He grabbed his head, fingers digging into his scalp. It doesn't want just anyone. It's picky, so picky. Jeremy, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, what happened when you disappeared? He went still. When he spoke again, his voice was different, clearer, calmer, which only made his words more terrifying. Dad took me there, to the well. Just like his father took him. Said it was time I knew. Time I saw what was waiting. But when it came out, he shuddered. I wasn't what it wanted. It chased me away. Through the trees. Through the dark. When I told them what happened, they locked me up here. I had so many questions, but not enough time. I chose the one that seemed most important. Your grandfather knew about this too? The well, he said, his eyes far away. He only showed me the well, the room. You have to pledge yourself first. You have to be chosen. What do you... If you really want to know more, girl, find the cabin. It's somewhere in the White Woods. I had more questions, but a sharp knock cut through the tension. Rachel, time's up, dear. John and I were waiting outside when we heard the commotion. Through the window, we could see Missy being dragged by 2 security guards, tears streaming down her face. We ducked around the corner, hearts pounding. "Try this again," one guard was saying, "and we'll call the police." Impersonating family members is a serious offense. The bike ride home was silent. That night, we ended up back at the oak tree, our sanctuary. John had gone down to grab some sodas from his house, leaving me alone with Missy up in our usual spot, where our initials were still carved from 3 years ago. She hadn't said much since the hospital. The setting sun painted everything in purple and gold, making the White Woods look almost beautiful from up here. We sat in silence, legs dangling from our favorite branch of the old oak tree, the same spot where we'd watched 1,000 sunsets before. But this one felt different, heavier. Remember when we used to pretend these woods were enchanted? I asked, trying to catch her eye. Back in middle school, Missy wrapped her arms around herself, managing a weak smile. Yeah, dragons and wizards and stuff. God, we were such dorks. Were? That got a real laugh out of her. Small, but genuine. Shut up, Matt. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying the scent of pine and something else. Something older, darker. Missy's laugh faded too quickly. Want to talk about it? I finally asked. About what happened with Jeremy? She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller. The Missy I knew was never small. She was the girl who punched Tommy W. in 8th grade for calling me a loser, who always took up as much space as she wanted. I don't even know where to start, she whispered. Start anywhere. I'm listening. She took a shaky breath. He knew I was lying. Started screaming that I was one of them. That I was part of the room, trying to trick him. Her voice cracked. The look in his eyes, Matt. He believed it. He really believed it. Jesus, I whispered. You don't understand, she continued, words tumbling out faster now. He was so normal before. Then he mentioned the cabin, and I tried to play it cool, but he saw right through me. She told me everything then, about the well, about what Jeremy had said, about the room. With each word, the woods seemed to grow darker, closer. It's like something out of those horror movies we used to watch, I said, trying to lighten the mood. Remember? When we'd stay up late at your place and your mom would get mad because we finished all the popcorn? This isn't a movie, Matt. Her voice was sharp. This is real. Jeremy is sick. Hey, I turned to face her fully. None of this is your fault. You know that, right? This guy was sick way before we got involved. The White Woods stretched out before us, endless and dark. So we need to find this cabin, I said. Guess so. She stared at the trees, and I could see the fear in her eyes. But something else too. Determination, maybe. We'll figure it out, I said, like we always do. Since when are you the optimistic one? Since you needed me to be. She looked at me then, really looked at me, like she was seeing something new. When did you grow up so much? I didn't say anything. She knew the answer. Missy? My voice was barely a whisper. Yeah, I'm so sorry for everything. Before I could think about it, I pulled her into a hug. Not one of those awkward side hugs we usually did, but a real one. The kind that says things you can't put into words. The kind that promises protection, even when you're not sure you can give it. She melted into it, and I felt her shoulders shake slightly. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. A real smile, soft and genuine. For the first time, I didn't see the annoying kid who used to pull my hair in elementary school. I saw Missy. Brave, terrified, beautiful Missy. You know what's weird? She said, wiping her eyes. Part of me wishes we could go back to when the scariest thing in these woods was our imagination. We can't go back, I said softly, but we can go forward, together. Thank you, Matt, she whispered. Her voice was so tender. Really. John's voice floated up from below, telling us we needed to head home before dark. Missy turned to climb down, but paused. In one quick motion, she leaned in and kissed my cheek. My face burned, and I watched her descend with the grace of someone who'd climbed this tree 1,000 times. She wasn't shaking anymore. I touched the spot where she'd kissed me, feeling something shift between us. Something that had been shifting for years, maybe, but I'd been too scared to notice. Whatever we were about to face in those woods, at least we'd face it together. And maybe that was enough. The sun sank lower, and the white woods seemed to grow darker, as if they knew we were coming, as if they were waiting. Sigh. The door clicked shut behind me. My hands were still shaking from the day's events. A day that should have given me answers, but only left me with more questions. Missy's words kept echoing in my head as I paced the creaking floorboards. There was something there, a thread I could follow. Both my father and Jeremy had mentioned the room. Whatever that meant, it had to be significant. I thought about confronting Dad again, but the memory of our last conversation made my stomach turn. His eyes had gone cold, distant, like he was looking through me rather than at me. No, he wouldn't help. That's when Grandpa Joe's face flickered through my mind. I'd spent years trying to forget him. The bitter old man who treated family like an inconvenience. Most of my memories of him were fragments. The smell of tobacco. The sound of a lock clicking shut. Larry's muffled cries from inside a dark closet. We'd only seen him twice as kids, and those babysitting sessions left scars that time couldn't quite heal. But now, with his heart failing and death circling like a patient vulture, Dad had brought us back here. Missy's words about generational knowledge nagged at me. The way she described Jeremy's hints about something being passed down, father to son, keeper to keeper. My feet carried me up the cabin stairs before my mind could catch up. The hallway stretched before me like a throat. Grandpa Joe's room, waiting at the end. Even from here, I could hear the symphony of machines keeping him tethered to life. The steady beep of heart monitors, the wet whisper of oxygen tanks. The closer I got, the more my courage wanted to fail. The door was slightly ajar, and the smell hit me first. That sterile hospital smell, mixed with something else. Something that reminded me of wet earth and decay. Grandpa Joe laid there, more corpse than man. I'd seen pictures of Egyptian mummies in textbooks that had more life in them than he did. His skin was like tissue paper stretched over a wire frame, so thin you could trace every vein beneath. Those sunken eyes were closed, but somehow I knew they could still see. Here was a man straddling two worlds, one foot in ours, the other already testing the waters of whatever comes next. I touched his shoulder, gentle at first, then a bit firmer. On the third try, those hollow eyes cracked open. Gran, a sound like rustling leaves escaped his lips. Sorry, what? What? Water? You need water? A slight nod, barely there. I helped him sip from a plastic cup. Each swallow looked painful, like he was drinking glass. When he finally spoke again, his voice was sandpaper on stone. Knew you'd come, Matthew. Ice water down my spine. I wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of a dying man, but something in those sunken eyes told me he was more lucid than he'd been in years. My mouth went dry. How did you... Boy! A coughing fit seized him, violent enough to shake the bed. He grabbed a tissue, and I pretended not to see the red spots blooming on the white. Time's short. Always is. Why waste it chasing shadows? Got a nice life here. Pretty girl. Good land. This isn't about fairy tales. It took Larry. Don't you even care? Something flickered behind those dead eyes. Pity, maybe. Or fear. Not enough. Not enough life left in me to argue. Trust those who know better. Some doors. Another cough. Some doors stay closed for a reason. I pressed him, but he slipped into memories, muttering about how different I was from my father. How Dad never questioned, never pushed, just worked the land like a good son should. I was about to give up when he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Stop digging, he wheezed, or you'll end up like that nosy bitch Jolene. My mother's name hit me like a physical blow. Mom was always more ghost than memory to me. Jolene, the journalist. That's all I really knew. It's why we used that cover for Missy. She'd vanished while working on some big story, right after Larry was born. We were all living on the farm then, though I was too young to remember. Now, standing in that room that smelled of death and antiseptic, pieces started shifting in my mind. Sleep didn't come that night. Questions bred like rabbits in my head. By dawn, I was back at Grandpa's door, ready to demand real answers. But the room was empty. The machines stood silent, their tubes lying limp like shed snakeskins. Through the window, movement caught my eye. Dad was coming out of the White Woods, pushing a wheelbarrow covered in blankets. He wheeled it into the barn, then carried the folded blankets inside. When he entered, he paused at the bottom of the stairs, and I knew he knew I was watching. We stood frozen in that moment, neither willing to break the silence that held more truth than words ever could. This was my battle now. I couldn't rely on anyone else. My mother involvement still loomed over me. I needed to understand it. I spent more grueling hours at the local library, but it felt like I was chasing ghosts. No death certificate, no obituary, not even a mention in the local papers about her disappearance. In a town this small, that kind of silence wasn't just strange. It was terrifying. I was onto something that made my blood run cold. But I couldn't tell Missy or John. This was my family's darkness to unravel. Even if I felt like a kid trying to move a mountain with a plastic shovel. I spent that whole day in the library's basement, breathing in decades of dust, flipping through endless microfiche reels until my eyes burned. Every dead end felt like a punch to the gut. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sickly shadows across yellowing newspapers, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I eventually admitted defeat. ... Larry would have known what to do. I keep talking about myself, but really, this is his story. My brother was always the clever one. Sure, I could memorize facts and ace tests, but Larry, he could read people like books and solve problems like puzzles. That's when it hit me. Maybe I was approaching this all wrong. Maybe I needed to think like Larry. When I got home, I walked into Dad's room. The air was thick with bourbon and regret. He sat there on his unmade bed, staring out the window like he was watching a movie only he could see. His eyes were empty, distant. For a moment, my anger wavered. Maybe he was as trapped in this nightmare as I was. But I knew it in my bones, that he had the answers about Mom, about Larry, about this whole cursed town. Dad? My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. He turned his head slowly, like his neck was rusted. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. A grunt escaped his lips, barely acknowledging my existence. I shifted my weight, trying to sound casual. I've got this school project. It's about family trees. Some questions about Mom. School? His eyes narrowed slightly. It's summer. My heart skipped, but I pressed on. Yeah, it's a summer assignment. We're supposed to gather family history and present it when we get back. His face darkened, and suddenly he seemed more alert. What kind of information? The words came out like ice cubes. Just basic stuff. Her career, her maiden name, things like that. He stared through me for what felt like forever, and I could almost see him weighing whether to call my bluff. Then something in him deflated. Don't remember much about your mother. Pushed it all away. Too painful. He took a long breath. She wrote for the local paper. Redacted was her maiden name. That's all you're getting. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. I spent hours working through phone books, making call after call, each wrong number feeling like another dead end. My fingers were numb from dialing when I finally heard the right voice. The connection crackled like autumn leaves. Hello? I managed. Who is this? The woman's voice was thin, fragile, but there was steel underneath. I'm Matthew. I think you might be my grandmother. The silence that followed was so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then I heard a soft sound, like someone trying not to cry. My daughter's boy, how did you find me? Phone books, but that's not important. Oh, Matthew. Her voice broke. I'm so sorry. So sorry we were never there. We talked for a while, her words spilling out like she'd been holding them back for years. She told me about leaving town after Mom disappeared, about the whispers and sideways glances, about how the whole place felt wrong somehow. My grandfather had refused to leave, stubbornly staying until his death last year. Each revelation felt like another piece of a puzzle I couldn't quite see. Finally, I steered us back to what mattered. Grandma, what was Mom working on before she disappeared? The static seemed to grow louder. What are you doing, Matthew? I wanted to tell her everything about Larry, about the well, about the growing certainty that something evil lived in our town. But I couldn't burden her with more fear. Larry's gone, Grandma, just like Mom. But this time I can do something. Please. Such a good heart, she whispered. Just like your mother. You shouldn't... It's not your choice. I cut in, softer than I meant to. Everyone keeps telling me to let it go, that I'm being foolish. But if there's any chance I can save Larry, if I can finally understand what happened to Mom, I have to try. Her sigh rustled through the line like dead leaves. She was investigating the old town well. My blood ran cold. She thought it was nonsense at first, just local folklore. But something changed. The last time I saw her, she was different, scared. Said she'd found something big. Then, her voice trailed off. After she vanished, people started asking questions about her work. Strange people. I knew I had to leave. I thanked her, made her promise to stay in touch. Her relief was palpable, like she'd been carrying this weight alone for too long. The newspaper office was my next stop. Most of what I found was useless, but the editor, an old man with nicotine-stained fingers and tired eyes, gave me one crucial detail. Mom had a writing cabin in the White Woods. She loved it out there, he said, shaking his head. Said it was peaceful. Never believed those old stories. The same cabin Jeremy wanted us to find. My heart was pounding as I realized the connection. I thought about texting Missy and John. They deserved to know, but this felt personal. The first time I saw my mother's sanctuary, it had to be alone. I waited until nightfall, lying fully dressed on my bed, listening to the house settle. When Dad's door finally clicked shut, I crept downstairs, each step a potential betrayal. Outside, The night air was thick with humidity. The white woods were different at night. My phone's flashlight carved weak paths through the darkness, but the shadows seemed to move on their own. I passed the well, its mouth a black circle against the ground, calling to me. Larry was down there, somewhere, but rushing in blind would only get me killed. Hours passed as I wandered, my feet aching, sweat soaking my shirt, despite the cool air. Just as I was about to give up, I saw it, a cabin, almost swallowed by the forest. The wood was gray with age, the windows dark and empty. Inside, chaos reigned. Papers everywhere, like dead leaves after a storm. Someone had been here before me, hiding whatever my mother found. Fast food wrappers and other signs of life suggested Jeremy had made this place his temporary home. I sifted through the papers, trying to piece together Mom's investigation. She'd been young when she started. It started with Jeremy. That's how she found out about the whole thing. The other interviews were useless. The real truth clearly removed. And who could I trust? The town was full of secrets, and even my own father was part of the conspiracy. Just as despair started to set in, I noticed something off about one of the desk drawers. A false bottom, cleverly hidden. Inside was a single piece of paper, my mother's signature at the bottom. The note made my blood freeze. To whoever has found this, I write these words knowing they may be my last. If you're reading this, you've likely stumbled down the same dark path I did, and I pray you're better prepared than I was. They're watching, always watching, even when you think you're alone. Their eyes are everywhere in this town. Dot. I came to this story as a skeptic, seeing only a quaint local legend worth a few column inches. How naive I was. What I've uncovered is a cancer at the heart of this place, a darkness that has fed on our silence for generations. Each layer I peeled back revealed something more horrifying, until I finally understood the true cost of knowing too much. To my children, if by some miracle you find this, I'm sorry. Sorry I won't see you grow up. Sorry I couldn't protect you from what's coming. To any other readers, I apologize. This may be the last thing I write. The truth is down there, in the dark. I've discovered something about the entity in the well. Something that might be its weakness. When it hasn't eaten in a long time, it's not as powerful. So tomorrow, I'll try to end this nightmare once and for all. If you're reading this, I failed. The revelation sent me spiraling. Each new piece of information hit like a punch to the gut, leaving me dizzy with questions and what-ifs. Mom had tried to stop it, whatever it was, and now I was left clutching fragments of a puzzle that refused to make sense. Every lead had turned into another dead end, and I was exhausted from chasing shadows around this god-forsaken town, hunting answers that seemed to evaporate like morning mist. The only way forward was terrifying. I'd have to follow in my mother's footsteps, maybe even face what she had faced. The walk home that night felt surreal, I'd finally found what I'd been searching for. Except I hadn't, not really. Larry was still missing, and the truth remained frustratingly out of reach. But at least now I knew it wasn't all in my head. The thing that haunted these woods was real. I suppose that counted for something, even if it wasn't exactly comforting. Dawn was breaking by the time I stumbled home, the sky turning that peculiar shade of gray-purple that makes everything look slightly wrong. My father was exactly where I'd left him, passed out in his armchair, an empty bottle dangling from his limp fingers. I fired off a quick text to Missy and John, asking them to meet me at the oak tree. While I waited, exhaustion crept up on me like a tide, and I kept catching myself drifting off. Missy's gentle touch on my shoulder startled me awake. She wore that soft smile of hers, the one that always made my heart skip a beat, even in times like these. I spilled everything. My grandfather's cryptic words, the disturbing absence of my mother's records, and the revelation about the cabin Jeremy had mentioned. The words tumbled out in a rush, like I couldn't get them out fast enough. Well, shit, John muttered, running a hand through his hair. He looked as tired as I felt. Missy leaned forward, her eyes intense. So we have to find this cabin now, right, Matt? I shifted uncomfortably, my hand going to my neck. Yeah, about that. When I finished telling them about my solo expedition, Missy's hand connected with the back of my head hard enough to make me see stars. Are you insane? She demanded. What if something had happened to you? What if you'd gotten lost? What were we supposed to do then? Keep going, I guess, I mumbled, not meeting her eyes. We need you, Matt. Her hand found mine, squeezing tight enough to hurt. We can't figure this out without you. I sighed, trying to hide how her touch made my face flush. I know it was stupid. I needed to see it for myself first. Well, from what you're saying, there's no point going back there now, Missy said, her voice heavy with resignation. John, who'd been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. So what's our next move? My eyes drifted to the white woods, those ancient trees standing like silent sentinels at the edge of town. I'm done waiting, I said, reaching behind me to pull out my father's handgun. The metal felt cold and wrong against my skin. If there's even a chance Larry's down there, we have to try. The gun safe's combination hadn't been hard to crack. Dad's birthday wasn't exactly Fort Knox security. Matt, Missy's hand connected with my head again, harder this time. It's for protection, I protested, rubbing the spot she'd hit. Look, I wanted to believe this was just some tweaker living in the woods, but if my mom said it was something more. I swallowed hard. I believe her. We exchanged glances then, and I recognized that look. The same one John had worn all those years ago when Larry first disappeared. It was that uniquely teenage mixture of courage and stupidity that makes you believe you're invincible. Without another word, we turned toward the white woods. This time, we'd face them together. Missy's hand found mine again. And then, surprisingly, John grabbed my other hand. I shot him a questioning look. Don't get any ideas, he grumbled. I'm scared shitless, and I'm not holding her hand. You're the buffer zone. The unexpected humor broke through our tension, drawing shaky laughs from all of us. And so we set out, a chain of trembling hands and racing hearts, to face whatever waited in those woods. My feet ached with every step, the familiar path seeming longer than ever before. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I wondered if our parents had noticed our absence yet, if they'd figured out where we'd gone. But those thoughts felt distant, unimportant. Only one question really mattered. Was Larry still alive? The well appeared before us, looking more ominous than ever in the morning light. That old instinct, the one that had kept me from following Larry down here years ago, screamed at me to turn back. This time, I forced it down. We shared one final look, drawing courage from each other's presence. And then I took the lead, gripping the rope and starting my descent. The beam of my flashlight, a proper one this time, not just a phone light, cut through the darkness below. When I reached the bottom, I understood why Missy had struggled to describe this place. The tunnels. Dear God, the tunnels. They sprawled in every direction, some horizontal, others diving at sickening angles into the earth. There were too many to count, each one a black mouth waiting to swallow us whole. Missy came down next, and I watched the color drain from her face as she took in the familiar sight. Her eyes went distant, like she was reliving that first terrible descent. I pulled her into a quick hug, whispering promises of protection that I wasn't sure I could keep. John's descent ended with a crash as the rope snapped halfway down. He hit the ground with a thud that echoed through the tunnels, sending up a cloud of dust. Nice entrance, fatty, I quipped, trying to mask my concern with humor. He scrambled for his dropped flashlight, muttering, "Shut up," as he checked himself for injuries. We all stared at the labyrinth before us, the weak sunlight from above doing little to penetrate the overwhelming darkness. I turned to Missy, dreading the answer to my next question. Which tunnel did it drag it into? Does it matter? She gestured helplessly at the broken rope above. We're trapped down here anyway. Shh, there has to be another way out, I insisted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. No way there are this many tunnels without multiple exits. She scanned the options nervously before pointing to one of the sloped passages. That one, I'm almost certain. My stomach clenched. The tunnel she indicated plunged downward at a steep angle, smooth from years of use. Getting in would be easy, maybe too easy. Getting out would be another story entirely. I pulled the gun from my waistband and handed it to Missy, showing her the safety switch. If you hear me yell, or if anything comes up that tunnel without announcing itself first, you empty the clip. Don't stop until whatever it is stops moving. She nodded, her hands steady despite her fear. Looking back, I probably sounded ridiculous, like I was quoting lines from some B-grade action movie. But fear has a way of making you dramatic. Reality came crashing back as I faced that dark descent. This wasn't a movie. There would be no dramatic music to warn us of danger. No convenient last-minute rescues. Whatever waited below, we'd face it alone. I started down the tunnel, trying to control my slide, as sharp rocks caught at my clothes and skin. The darkness seemed to thicken as I descended, becoming almost physical, like it was trying to push me back up. When I finally reached the bottom, I found myself in another chamber, empty, save for more branching tunnels. We weren't in a simple cave system. We were in a maze. "All clear," I called up, then added, "When Larry disappeared, Missy ran into the woods first, but Larry was the first down the well." The personal detail was our makeshift password, proving it was really me calling. They joined me moments later, their faces showing the same mix of relief and disappointment I felt at finding the chamber empty. "Where to now?" Missy asked, gripping the gun like a lifeline. "Why does she get to keep the gun?" John whined, though his attempt at humor couldn't quite mask his fear. "Because she can actually hit what she aims at," I said, studying our options. "And honestly, I have no idea where we go from here." We chose tunnels at random, descending deeper into the Earth's embrace. Time lost all meaning in the darkness. It could have been hours or days. We were climbing out of yet another passage when disaster struck. My foot found what felt like solid ground, but it shifted beneath my weight. I made a desperate grab for the tunnel's edge, but momentum had already claimed me. My flashlight went spinning away into the void as I fell, and for one strange, peaceful moment, I was floating in absolute darkness. The impact drove the air from my lungs. I landed on something that cracked and shifted beneath me, my head snapping back to connect with what felt like stone. When I managed to stand, pain blazed across my back. At least one serious cut, maybe more. Above me, two beams of light danced frantically. I could hear Missy and John calling down, their voices distorted by the cave's acoustics. Through some miracle, my flashlight had survived the fall. When I retrieved it and finally got a good look at my surroundings, I realized this chamber was different, larger, older. The pile I'd landed on, my stomach turned as I recognized the gleam of old bone, yellowed and brittle with age. This wasn't just another tunnel or chamber. This was something else entirely. The walls told stories. Some were clearly human, desperate prayers and pleas scratched into the stone. Others were different. They looked like attempts at human writing and drawing, but wrong somehow. Like whatever had made them understood the concept, but couldn't quite execute it properly. This wasn't just a cave. It was a prison. My mother's distinctive handwriting caught my eye, carved into the dirt wall. "Exit is up." The words explained the poorly patched ground I'd fallen through. But they also raised a haunting question. Had she escaped this place, or were her bones mixed with the others beneath my feet? I looked around more, and a carving caught my eye immediately. Something about it seemed fresher, than the ancient markings surrounding it. I struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. The crude lines formed something that shouldn't exist. A mass of twisted shapes that might have been limbs, though my mind rejected that interpretation. Two impossibly long appendages reached down from the central mass, and before it, tiny human figures knelt in what could only be worship. But it was what lay beneath the carving that truly grabbed my attention. A small opening, barely visible, where the earth seemed different, thinner somehow. I attacked it with desperate energy, kicking and scraping until my muscles burned. The dirt was like concrete, unyielding, but I could sense hollow space behind it. I slammed my flashlight against the weak spot again and again, watching the hole slowly widen. When it was finally large enough, I began tearing away chunks of packed earth with my bare hands. After one final heave, the passage opened before me. I glanced around, nervously. No sign of John or Missy. Taking a deep breath, I squeezed through. This tunnel was different from the others, somehow. It seemed to go on forever. Something pulled me forward, deeper into this impossible place. Each step felt like surrendering a piece of my sanity. Yet I couldn't stop. ... The tunnel opened into another chamber, larger than the last. My flashlight beam swept across bare walls, finding no trace of the mysterious markings that had decorated the previous chambers. Then the light fell on something that made my heart stop. Larry, my little brother, lying peacefully on what looked like a pillow in the chamber's center, as if he'd been waiting for me all along. I rushed to him, shaking him desperately, but he remained unconscious. With no other choice, I hoisted him over my shoulder, surprised by his weight. He should have been emaciated after all this time, but his body felt solid, healthy, wrong somehow. Later I'd question this, but in that moment, all that mattered was that I'd found him alive. That's when I heard it. The sound that ripped through that underground chamber will haunt me until the day I die. It started as an inhuman shriek that clawed at my eardrums. A sound so high and piercing, I thought my head would split open. Then it transformed, melting into something deeper, wetter. A sound that belonged in the primordial ooze, where life first crawled from the sea. I turned, and my world shattered. My mother stood there. For one insane moment, I wanted to run to her, to embrace her with my free arm. But my mother had been gone for years, and this is just whatever wore her face now. I stood frozen, my muscles locked in terror. Then Missy's voice cut through the horror. "Matt, come on. I think we might have found a way out." She burst into the chamber and stopped dead, taking in the nightmare before her. The thing wearing my mother's face let loose another sound. Not a scream this time, but something worse. Something hungry. I was looking at Missy when it happened, and perhaps that's the only reason I retained my sanity. The sound of rending flesh filled the chamber, wet and thick, like someone tearing a wet leather coat. When I turned back, my mother's skin lay in ribbons on the ground, like discarded gift wrap. And what emerged? God help me, what emerged. It towered above us, easily 15 feet tall. Its gray skin an impossible contradiction. Ancient and cracked, like weathered stone in some places. Smooth and almost beautiful in others. The central mass of its body remained mercifully hidden within folding layers of flesh. But what protruded from between its countless arms defied comprehension. Organs, if you could call them that, pulsed with colors that had no right existing in our reality. Tubular structures connected to throbbing sacs that seemed to serve some horrific purpose I couldn't begin to understand. The stench hit me then, ancient, sweet, and wrong, like honey mixed with grave dirt. For a moment that stretched into eternity, it just watched me. And in that moment, I felt something impossible. A connection. A conversation without words. It reached into my mind with thoughts that weren't thoughts. Showing me things I still can't describe. It wanted something. Desperately. But not Larry. No. It wanted something else. Something I still don't understand. Then it moved. Those impossibly long arms began to carry its massive bulk forward. Smaller limbs scuttling underneath, like the legs of some cosmic spider. The sight broke whatever spell had held me in place. I ran to Missy, who was already turning to flee. We found John waiting in the tunnel, and he immediately took Larry from me. Thank God for his football player's build. Missy pressed the gun into my trembling hands. Dot. This tunnel was massive compared to the others, with actual carved steps leading upward. We ran side by side, our footsteps echoing off ancient stone. The thunderous sounds behind us grew closer, and when I dared to look back, I saw those arms stretching toward us, bones cracking like gunshots as they extended far beyond what any limb should reach. I felt fingers like steel cables wrap around my ankle, and I went down hard. 7 shots rang out in the tunnel, the gun bucking in my hands as I fired at the grotesque limb. The bullets might as well have been spitballs. They didn't even draw blood. I fumbled for my pocket knife, but it slipped from my sweating hands as the thing began dragging me backward. John must have passed Larry to Missy, because suddenly he was there, slashing at the arm with savage desperation. The creature's screech of rage shook loose dust from the ceiling, and then, oh God, John, my best friend since 3rd grade. I tried to reach him, but another arm shot between us. I ducked and scrambled backward, realizing the creature couldn't stretch any further. But that knowledge came too late for John. What happened next? I won't. Let's just say death was probably a mercy, though it wasn't quick enough to be merciful. Does it make me a coward that I ran? That I left his body there, in that nightmare place? He was beyond saving. I tell myself that every day, but the guilt never leaves. I ran until my lungs burned, until I reached the top where Missy waited with Larry. One look at my face told her everything. Her knees gave out as the sobs started. "John," she whispered, I couldn't even shake my head. We'd emerged into what looked like an abandoned church, though everything about it felt wrong. The angles of the walls, the strange symbols carved into the rotting pews. The hatch we'd come through was massive, and it took both of us to seal it. Even through the thick wood and metal, we could hear its rage, its grief, its hunger. I'm still not sure which. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, partly out of respect for John, partly because we simply couldn't process what had happened. The church probably held answers. It had to be connected to whatever dwelt below. But we couldn't bring ourselves to investigate. What was the room? Had we found it? None of it seemed to matter anymore. We had Larry back, but at what cost? The town we emerged into was unfamiliar. Some older section we'd never explored. People stared at us. 3 teenagers covered in dirt and blood, carrying an unconscious boy. Larry woke up at some point, but he wasn't really there. When I hugged him, it was like embracing a mannequin. Sheriff Reynolds was the first to question us. "Start from the beginning," he said, his pen hovering over his notepad. I watched his face as we told our rehearsed story, saw the moment he stopped believing us. "And John?" he pressed. "You're saying he just wandered off?" "We got separated," Missy said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. It was dark in those woods. The worst was Missy's mom. She'd always treated me like a second child, but that night in their kitchen, she looked at me like I was a stranger. "Matt," she said, gripping her coffee mug so tight I thought it might shatter. "I need the truth. What really happened to John?" Dot. I met her eyes, saw the fear there, the desperate need to understand. "We told you everything we know," I lied, hating myself for it. "Our dad was different. He didn't ask questions. Maybe he couldn't bear to. He just sat by Larry's bed in the hospital, holding his son's limp hand, whispering things I couldn't hear." That summer melted into a haze of half-truths and carefully constructed lies, each one tasting more bitter than the last. We spun our story about finding Larry in the White Woods, about John getting separated during the search. The words felt hollow even as we spoke them. People in town would nod along, their eyes saying what their mouths wouldn't, that they knew we were hiding something. But what could they do? The truth was too vast, too impossible for their small-town minds to hold. My father retreated into his bottles, drinking not to forget, but to blur the edges of something he seemed to recognize. I'd catch him sometimes, staring at Larry across the dinner table, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, a look of raw terror flickering across his face before he drowned it in another gulp of whiskey. He knew something about that well, about what lived down there. But he took that knowledge to his grave 3 years later. Missy and I tried to keep our relationship alive, meeting in secret after her parents branded me dangerous, a bad influence. We'd sneak out to the old railroad bridge, where the rust-stained metal still sang with memories of better days. Her hand would find mine in the darkness, but there was always a tremor in her touch now, a hesitation that hadn't been there before. We were like two survivors of a shipwreck, clinging to each other, but slowly drifting apart on separate pieces of debris. Larry, God, Larry was the worst part. My brother came back wrong. He was there, but not there. Like someone had hollowed him out and stuffed him full of cotton. I'd try to talk to him about normal things. Baseball scores, girls, college plans. But his responses were always slightly off. Like an actor who'd memorized his lines, but didn't understand their meaning. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at nothing, his head tilted, as if listening to a conversation only he could hear. The brother I'd grown up with, the one who'd taught me to ride a bike and defended me from bullies, was gone. In his place was this uncanny duplicate that wore my brother's face, but couldn't quite remember how to use it properly. When I left for college 3 years later, I begged Missy to come with me. We stood in her backyard, the moon casting long shadows through the oak trees, and I poured out everything I'd been holding back. How I loved her, how we could start fresh, somewhere else, somewhere without the weight of that summer pressing down on us. She cried as she told me no, her fingers gripping my shirt so tight her knuckles went white. Her father was sick, cancer, and she couldn't leave him. I understood, but understanding didn't make it hurt any less. That night, as I drove away, I watched her shrinking figure in my rear-view mirror until she disappeared, just like the brother I'd lost to the well. I spent the next decade building walls around those memories, convincing myself it had all been some mass hallucination brought on by trauma and teenage hormones. I got a job in a big city, bought a condo, dated women who'd never heard of my hometown. I became someone new, someone who'd never heard strange whispers echoing up from dark places. Then Missy called. Her voice on the phone was older, rougher around the edges, but still unmistakably hers. The fear in it hit me like a physical blow. Larry was gone again. 3 days missing. His wife found a notebook filled with strange drawings, circles within circles, and in the margins, over and over, the word waiting. Now, I'm on a plane watching familiar countryside scroll past below, each mile bringing me closer to the place I swore I'd never return to. My hands haven't stopped shaking since I got her call. There's a weight in my chest, a mixture of dread and something else. Responsibility, duty, whatever it is, it pulls at me like a hook behind my ribs. Because deep down, in that dark place where we keep the truths we can't face in daylight, I've always known this wasn't over. That thing in the well, that presence that spoke without words, it's been patient. It's been waiting. And somehow, I've always known I'd be back. Maybe I'm the only one who can end this. Or maybe I'm just the next chapter in its story. Either way, I'm going back. to the well. Back to where it all began. Back to whatever's been waiting all these years for our return. My plane just landed. I'll update you whenever I can. I grew up on the edge of an old pine forest, where the towering treetops whispered to the wind, and the morning fog drifted like an unfinished lullaby. Our house, just me and my mother, was tucked away in the middle of nature, like a small secret. No one ever visited, and no one passed by. We lived quietly, without noise, without needing much. My mother was a soft-spoken woman who loved growing wild chrysanthemums and cooking traditional dishes from recipes she had learned from my grandmother. She didn't speak much, but the way she looked at me, the subtle nod she gave whenever I came home on time, made me feel like my life had its own quiet rhythm, simple and complete. Each morning, I would wake up to sunlight seeping through thin curtains, crawling up the dark wooden ceiling. The faint aroma of coffee drifted from the kitchen. The sound of a knife chopping vegetables repeated steadily, pleasant, like a familiar background melody. At night, when I sat outside reading or simply listening to the insects, my mother would call me in with the same line every time. "Come eat, child." No more, no less. That line echoed from the front porch, gentle, but loud enough to cut through the trees and wind, finding its way to me like an invisible thread, pulling me home. When I was little, I used to joke that if I ever got lost in the woods, all I'd need was to hear that sentence to find my way back. My mother would just smile, lips closed, wrinkles at the corner of her eyes, as if she knew something I didn't. Maybe she did. Summers here were strangely beautiful. The daylight was golden like poured honey, and the nights cool enough for the wool sweaters my mother knitted. I often walked along a narrow path through the forest, one I assumed had been carved by either past wanderers or wild animals. I wasn't sure, but it was always clean, always smelled of rotting wood and dried leaves. One time, I asked my mother, "Why don't we move into town, closer to the hospital, easier for shopping?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked out the window, where the old pines swayed like waves, then quietly said, "It's peaceful here. I don't need anything else." I never asked again. Life on the forest's edge was like that, quiet but not empty. Each day passed like a thin mist, weightless, yet enveloping me with the subtle presence of nature and my mother. We had a habit of not locking the door during the day. In this area, everyone knew each other, or if they didn't, they simply didn't care. But night was different. My mother always locked the door thoroughly. 2 locks, a horizontal bolt, and an old-fashioned key lock. Windows closed tight too, though I often complained it made the house stuffy. She never explained why, only said, "The forest at night isn't like during the day. Some things only wake after sunset. Back then, I thought she was just superstitious. Now, I'm not so sure. I was 28, 3 months unemployed after a round of company layoffs. Instead of rushing to find a new job, I decided to come back and stay with my mother for a while. Partly because I missed her, but mostly because I needed silence. In the city, everything screams. Cars, deadlines, people. Here, even the birds whisper. My father died young. I don't remember his face. All I know is that after he passed, my mother never remarried. She poured everything into me, not with loud affection, but a slow, steady love, warm like broth simmering on a small fire. When I left for school, she still kept my room clean, even washed the blanket every month, though no one slept in it. One evening in early April, when the fog was thicker than usual, I sat outside with a book in my lap, the cold air creeping into my collar. I heard my mother's voice call, "Come eat, child." Her tone was clear, steady, with that gentle scolding edge she always used when soup was about to go cold. I smiled, marked my page, dusted off my pants, and walked toward the porch. The kitchen was glowing with warm yellow light. The scent of lotus root soup wafted all the way to the porch. I stepped inside. My mother was pouring water, her back turned to me. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. But something small, so small, like a fine thorn pricking my heart, felt off. I couldn't remember seeing her walk out to the porch. No footsteps. No sound of the door opening. Just a voice coming from outside the door, as if someone was imitating a voice I knew too well to doubt. I shivered, then shook my head and chuckled. You're just tired, paranoid. Who else could it be but Mom? But from that moment on, I started paying attention and slowly realized sometimes the most familiar thing can be the most terrifying. I quickly forgot that little incident. Maybe it was because that lotus root soup tasted unusually good, sweet and light, in just the right balance, as if my mother had cooked it using some special well water, not the filtered tap, as usual. She didn't say a word, just placed an extra piece of fish in my bowl and chewed quietly. Her meals always had a soft kind of soundtrack. The clink of spoon on ceramic, the gentle crunch of chewing, and the whisper of wind outside the wooden window. I had 2 bowls of rice, slept a deep, dreamless sleep, and forgot. The next evening, I went out to the backyard again, carrying a cup of herbal tea my mother had steeped from mint leaves grown behind the kitchen. The night was colder than usual. The sky was clear, stars shining sharp and bright. There's something strangely comforting about staring up into the dark sky. It makes you feel small, like you're back in your mother's arms, protected by the night instead of afraid of it. I began to doze off on the wooden chair, head tilted to the left, the cup still warm in my hand. And then I heard it. Come eat, child. I opened my eyes. The voice was soft as mist, yet unmistakable. The tone was identical to the night before. Not just the words, but the rhythm, the pauses between them, the way she emphasized eat, as if someone was replaying a perfectly recorded voice. I sat up and rubbed my eyes. The kitchen light was on. I stood and walked around to the front door. But my mother wasn't there. Only the empty porch. No footsteps, no creaky hinges. No sound of the door opening and closing like it always did. I stepped into the house, not quite suspicious, just puzzled. My mother was standing at the sink, rinsing vegetables. The water trickled softly. I asked, "Did you just call me?" She didn't turn around, just said, "No, I thought you were sleeping out there." I stood still for a moment. The house felt colder than I remembered. Or maybe my heart had just skipped a beat. That night I didn't fall asleep right away. I lay there listening to the wind rustling through the window slats, replaying the way my mother said no. Not rushed, not nervous, but also not confident. Maybe she forgot. Old people forget things, right? Right? I decided to try something. The next night, I waited until late, after my mother had already gone to bed. I texted her beforehand. "I'm heading out to the yard for a bit of fresh air. I'll come in soon." She replied with a smiling emoji. I brought my tea and sat on the wooden chair like always. The moon was dimmer that night. Clouds floated like sea foam. The forest felt darker than usual. The breeze was gentle but chilly, just enough to raise goosebumps on my arms, though I couldn't tell if it was the weather or something else. I waited. Half an hour, nothing, no voice, nothing at all. I chuckled at myself, stood up, dusted off my shirt, and right then, as if on cue, "Come eat, child." I flinched. The voice came from the front door, clear as day. Then, silence. I didn't rush back inside. I stood still, waited. No footsteps, no door opening. I stepped back and walked around to the front. The yellow porch light was still on, casting a glow over the wicker chair where my mother usually embroidered. Empty. I knocked. My mother opened the door, still groggy. "What's wrong, dear?" I swallowed hard. "Have you been outside at all?" She shook her head. Her expression wasn't confused, just tired. I was sleeping. Why? I didn't answer, just stepped inside. From that night, I started paying attention. And what I noticed frightened me in the quietest way. Not panic, not screaming, just a creeping cold inside me, like a cup of tea forgotten on the porch overnight. The voice only came after dark, only when I was outside, and it was always the same sentence. No more, no less, never a change in tone, like a recording played at the exact moment. Once, I tried hiding. I crouched behind the wall near the living room window, the door slightly ajar. My mother was asleep. The porch light glowed dimly. I stood there for nearly an hour, heart beating slowly, barely moving. "Come eat, child." I jumped. The voice was close. I leaned out. No one. I stepped outside. Silence. I stood there a long while, looking around, trying to listen. No retreating footsteps. No gust of wind. Nothing. Just an invisible presence that had crossed the line between familiar and wrong. Another night, I was folding blankets in my room when I heard the voice. But this time, something was slightly off. Very slight. Very faint. Just the ending of the word child was stretched a little longer, like the speaker hadn't memorized it well. I told my mother, for the first time. She was silent for a long while, then said, "So, you've heard it too." I froze. Her response sounded like it had been waiting. I asked, "What do you mean? You knew?" She looked out the window. The nighttime forest was silent, like a trap with its jaws wide open. "When I was your age," she began, "I heard a voice too, but it was my parents calling me out of the house." I clenched my fists, not from cold. She told me she had once been lured out, stepping off the porch, walking a few steps into the woods. But she turned back just in time, because the voice repeated 3 times, exactly the same. No one in the world says something identically 3 times in a row. No one can mimic emotion perfectly. "It only learns the voice," she whispered. "It doesn't understand emotion. It doesn't get tone, but it learns fast." I asked, "What is it?" She only said, "Not human. And it can't enter the house unless you answer." Since that night, I never stayed outside past 7 p.m. But I know it's still there, waiting, every night, learning. Part 3. Mom once heard it call. After the night my mother confessed she had once heard the same voices, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, not because I believed something was lurking just beyond the door, but because she had known all along. She knew and never told me. I lay on the bed, a strip of yellow light from the hallway stretching across the curtain. The ticking of the wall clock echoed like the heartbeat of an old house. A soft breeze slipped through the window slats, fluttering the curtain's edge, like an invisible hand gently brushing against my quiet world. I closed my eyes, and her words echoed in my mind. "Not human, and it can't come inside unless you answer." The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky was pale gray. No sun, but not gloomy either. Mom was cooking porridge. The scent of ginger drifted through the kitchen. I sat down on the wooden chair, wrapped my hands around the warm teacup, and asked softly, "Can you tell me everything?" She didn't look at me right away. She just set the wooden spoon down, wiped her hands on her apron, and exhaled long and deep, as if she had been holding that breath her whole life. "When I was little," she began, her voice slow and steady like a lullaby, "your grandparents lived deep in the mountains. Their wooden house was near a stream, surrounded by forest on all sides. I closed my eyes and pictured it. The scene was eerily like our own home. Peaceful, isolated, with the sound of trees rustling like a private conversation. Back then, we didn't have electricity. Every house closed up early at night. No one wandered around after 7 p.m. Why not? I asked. Mom frowned. Because that's when the voices began. She told me that when she was 9, she once stayed out too long by the stream and lost track of time. The sun had already dipped behind the hills, its last light painting the treetops red. As she was walking home, she heard her mother's voice, my grandmother's, calling from behind, "Come eat, child." Exactly the same sentence I'd been hearing for nights. Exactly the same. I thought I'd gotten lost, she said. The path home didn't look familiar anymore. The trees on either side seemed to have shifted. She paused, her eyes distant, flickering with a memory that was equal parts nostalgia and fear. I followed the voice. It repeated 3 times, each spaced by a single breath, and each time the voice sounded more like her. "What did you see?" I asked. "A person," Mom said softly, sitting with their back turned on a stone in the middle of the forest. The moonlight was faint, but I could make out the figure. Looked exactly like my mother. Hair tied up neatly, slender frame. I held my breath. Mom leaned closer to me, lowering her voice like she was afraid something beyond the kitchen door might hear. But when I stepped closer, the person lifted their head before turning around. And I saw clearly, it had no face. I felt a chill run down my spine. Not because of how eerie it was, but because my mother's voice never wavered. She wasn't trying to scare me. She wasn't making it up. Every word fell like truth compressed by years of silence. I said nothing. She continued. I ran, but the forest stretched endlessly. With every step, the voice came from ahead of me, like it was leading me, not chasing. "How did you escape?" She went silent for a few seconds, then said, "I bit my tongue, hurt myself to stay conscious, and I remembered what my mother once told me. If the voice sounds too perfect, don't answer. Real people don't repeat the same sentence exactly like that. Humans have emotion. That thing only mimics sound." She turned back to the kitchen, ladled porridge into a bowl, and set it in front of me. The smell of ginger and fried shallots suddenly made me realize how hungry I was. "After that night," she said, "whenever I heard the voice, I stuffed cotton in my ears, locked the doors, and kept the lights on all night. When I grew up and left the mountains, I thought I'd escaped. I picked up a piece of salted egg and chewed slowly. But it followed you?" She nodded, very slightly. "It doesn't follow people," Mom said. "It follows voices." I froze. "Meaning?" She looked me straight in the eyes. "It learned my voice, imitated it, memorized it, and now it's using that voice to caw. We ate in silence. The porridge was delicious, as always, but I couldn't taste a thing. In my head, every other sound faded, except for one line. It follows voices. That night, I didn't go outside. I sat in the living room with the lights on. Mom lit incense and murmured something ancient, maybe a prayer. The wind outside picked up, and at exactly 7:23 p.m., "Come eat, child." The voice came from 3 directions at once. I couldn't tell if it was outside the front door, the kitchen window, or the wall beside my room. All I knew was one thing. It had perfected my mother's voice. Part 4, when Mom didn't answer. I don't know what woke me at 3:17 a.m. Not a sound, not a light. Maybe just a wrong beat in the house, like the heartbeat of an old home skipping out of rhythm. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, the curtains half closed. Outside was a pale, murky gray, the kind of light that isn't quite night, but not yet dawn. I listened. Silence. The kind of silence that rings in your ears. So quiet that there were no insects, no wind, not even the sound of trees brushing against one another. As if the forest was holding its breath. I stepped out of my room, bare feet on the wooden floor. My mother's door was wide open. At first, I didn't think much of it. I called softly, "Mom?" No response. I walked into the kitchen. No one there. The lights were off. The dining table was bare. No pots, no bowls, as if no one had cooked anything yesterday. I looked toward the front door. It was slightly ajar. Just enough to let a sliver of light spill in from the porch. I stepped closer, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. It wasn't locked. I opened it. The porch was empty. The forest mist was thick, freezing like ice water. At first, I hoped she had just stepped outside to water the plants, or maybe felt dizzy and needed some air. I called again, "Mom?" No answer. I ran around the house. No one. The feeling wasn't fear. It was like losing gravity. Like when you miss a step in the dark on a staircase, and your heart falls and gets stuck somewhere under your ribs. I grabbed my coat, my shoes, and a flashlight. Right before I stepped into the backyard, something deep inside told me, "Don't leave the porch." But then I heard it. My mother's voice, clear, coming from the woods. "Help me. Please, honey." I don't remember how I started running. Only the beam of the flashlight swinging across pine trunks, dewy grass, and faint tracks in the soil, like footprints pressed into soft earth. Her voice rang out again, closer. "Here, help me," I shouted. "Mom, I'm here." Nothing. Then crying, sobbing, hoarse and broken. Sweetheart, it tricked me. I ran like a madman, and then I saw her. Or what I wanted to believe was her, sitting against a thick pine tree, body hunched, long hair covering half her face, a dark green knit shawl, the same one my mom always wore when it got cold. I ran to her. "Mom!" She didn't look up. I knelt beside her and placed my hand on her shoulder, ice cold. "Mom, it's me. What happened to you?" She lifted her head, and I recoiled like I'd touched a live wire. It was my mother's face, but wrong. Not because it was deformed, but because it was too perfect. No expression, eyes wide open, unblinking, eyelids slightly stretched, like wax. Her mouth moved, as if reciting a memorized line. "Sweetheart, help me." The voice was flawless, but there was no soul in it. I backed away, slipping in a patch of wet ground. The person stood, slow, unsteady, like it wasn't used to the body it was wearing. I pointed the flashlight straight at its face, and I saw its eyes didn't reflect the light. Humans, no matter how dark it is, their eyes always reflect a little light. This thing didn't. It stepped toward me, then stopped, lowered its head, raised a hand slightly. Then its voice changed to mine. "Mom, please." I screamed. I lost all control. I turned and ran. Footsteps behind me, slow, steady. It wasn't chasing me. It didn't need to. It knew I would come back. I ran until I saw the porch light of my house. I slammed the door shut, locked both bolts, backed up until my spine hit the wall. And then, knock, knock, knock. 3 knocks on the door. Not loud, not rushed, just perfectly timed. Like someone who knows you're there and knows you'll eventually have to open. I didn't move. Then I heard my mother's voice, right behind the door. "Sweetheart, open the door. I'm lost." I didn't answer. I remembered her words. "Unless you answer, it can't come inside." The voice fell silent. I sat there until morning, too afraid to close my eyes, too afraid to hope that my mother was still alive. I didn't leave the house for 3 days. All the doors were locked, curtains drawn tight, lights on day and night. I survived on canned food, cold rice, and filtered water from the emergency jugs Mom had stored in case of storms. I didn't open the door, didn't dare look outside, didn't dare listen. Because I knew, just once if I heard that voice again, I'd lose what was left of my sanity. At first, I thought it had left. 3 days, no knocking, no shadow flitting past the edge of the trees, no one calling my name in Mom's voice, or mine. I nearly convinced myself it was a nightmare, a stress-induced hallucination after Mom disappeared. Maybe I was just paranoid. But then, night 4, 2:51 a.m. I was sitting in the living room under a dim fluorescent light, a cold cup of tea in my hand. I was about to get up and turn off the stove when I heard it scratch, a soft sound like fingernails gently dragging across wood. It came from the front door. I froze. My heart pounded, racing, but I didn't move. I listened. Scratch, scratch, then silence. I sat there for 15 minutes, motionless, didn't speak, barely breathed. And then, as if the thing outside was waiting for that stillness, a voice called out, "Sweetheart, Mommy's home." I felt every pore on my body tighten at once. That voice, perfect, not close, not similar. It was my mother's voice, down to the delicate tremble at the end of the word, home. I'd heard that voice my entire life, on the phone, in dreams, on old voicemails, and now it was outside my door. I stepped backward like a cat, pressing myself to the wall. I didn't dare answer, didn't dare get close. I remembered Mom's words. It can't come inside unless you answer. I slid down the wall, arms hugging my knees. 1 minute, 5, 10. Then footsteps on the porch. Slow, heavy. Then, aren't you going to open? I made your favorite soup. You like it hot. I bit down on my lip until it bled. It had learned more. Not just the voice, but memories. I don't know how. Maybe Mom is still alive. Maybe it took her memories. Or worse, it fed on them. The next morning, I inspected every lock in the house. No signs of tampering. But I found a tiny, bare footprint on the damp cement. Longer than Mom's foot. Thin. Toes unnaturally uniform. Like it wasn't a real foot, but a rendered copy from a template. That night, I tied a cord around my wrist and attached it to the sofa arm, a way to restrain myself. To be sure I wouldn't sleepwalk, wouldn't open the door in a daze. I also played a recording of forest doors still locked. But something hung in the air. The smell of sour soup. I walked to the kitchen. Empty. No pot. No food. Just a white porcelain bowl on the table. Perfectly centered. Like someone had placed it there, carefully. The bowl held only clear water. But when I leaned in, the stench of sour soup hit me hard. So strong, I nearly vomited. I staggered back, hands trembling. The next morning, I dug out the old security cameras in the house. Part of the system Mom had installed after Dad died. I connected the drive and rewound the footage from the night before. And then, I saw a frame I will never forget. 3:13 a.m. Kitchen camera. A figure standing behind the fridge door. Still, not moving, facing the camera. I zoomed in. It was me. Except, I never left the sofa that night. I kept watching. That me stood there for nearly 10 minutes. Then, as if it sensed the camera, it tilted its head 90 degrees. An unnatural movement, like its neck was made of fake joints. Its eyes locked on the lens, no blinking, no pupils. I vomited until only bile came up. My vision blurred. The world began to spin. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, lights blazing. Chair pulled tight against the wall. My back pressed hard against cold wood. I held a kitchen knife. My wrist wrapped in a bandage, from pulling the cord too tight the night before. The air felt heavy. I knew it would come, and it did. 3:08 a.m. A knock, 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 knock. I didn't move. Then the voice. Sweetheart, open the door for mommy. Silence. Then, sweetheart, someone's here. I heard a second voice. Not mom's, not mine. I froze. Two voices. One female, one male. One was mom. The other, something else entirely. A long pause. Then, laughter. Mom's laugh. Not soft, but long, distorted. Like tape being played backward. Hee 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 hee. I covered my ears, curled into a ball. And finally, a whisper seeped in. I know you're still alive. I learn fast. The next morning, I stepped onto the porch. The white porcelain bowl was still there. And inside, not water, a small bone. Like a finger, pale, with dried blood at one end. I knelt quietly on the porch and cried, not out of fear, but because I knew my mother was truly gone. And even if I survived, I would never be the same again. Part 6. When my mother returned, I woke up to the smell of sour soup. Not a hallucination, not the lingering scent of some old memory, but a real smell. Strong, warm, with hints of ginger and tomato, rising from the kitchen like a rope, pulling me out of it. Was morning. Soft sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting lines across the cold, tiled floor. I wasn't dreaming. I heard the clinking of a spoon against a pot, and then that voice. You're up? I made fish soup. Come eat before it gets cold. I froze in place, every joint locked, my eyes wide, staring at the half-open door. I stepped out slowly. Each movement felt like stepping across thin ice. The kitchen lights were on. My mother stood there, her back to me, stirring soup on the stove. Her silver hair was neatly tied back, just like always. She wore the dark green sweater I'd washed for her a few weeks ago. Her posture, completely normal. Mom, I called, my voice trembling. She turned around. That face, that smile. Her eyes squinting slightly at the sunlight. No error, no blur, no hollow stare, no waxy expression. Just my mother. Why are you looking at me like that? She chuckled. It's only been a few days, and you look like you've seen a ghost. I didn't answer. I sat down at the table. She scooped me a bowl of soup. The aroma tore through my veil of suspicion and knotted in my throat. I watched her closely. Her hand movements, the way she picked up vegetables, her voice, her gaze, everything was right. Too right. Where did you go these past few days? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She set the spoon down and smiled. I went into town. I wasn't feeling well, so I caught a ride to the clinic. Just to be safe, forgot to leave a note. The clinic's 40 kilometers away. Yeah, I hitched a ride with a delivery truck. The driver was nice. I nodded, but my heart pounded like a drum. She had never left without telling me. Never forgot a detail. I asked again, "Do you remember what my favorite dish is?" She smiled. "Of course. You like snakehead fish sour soup. No pineapple, extra okra, and lots of rice paddy herb. I even added a pinch of MSG, just like you always say." I sat still. I didn't even know if Mom remembered all that. But the way she answered, quick, smooth, made me feel unsafe. Like she was reading a line that had been rehearsed. That whole day, I watched her. She swept the floor, washed dishes, made tea, sat by the window reading. Everything was flawless. Too flawless. No mistakes, no slips of the hand, no nagging me about my shoes being messy, no yawns, no rubbing her eyes, no coughing, not a single human imperfection. That evening, I tested her. I asked, "Do you remember when I broke my arm?" She nodded, eyes warm. "When you were 7, fell on the stone steps behind our old house. Had to wear a cast for a month. Do you remember what you said then?" She smiled. I said, "It's okay. Mommy's here." My blood ran cold because I remembered clearly. Mom had panicked. She cried. All she could say over and over was, "Dear God, please don't let it be broken." She never said, "It's okay. Mommy's here." I knew for certain. And now I was sure. That wasn't my mother. That night, I lay in bed, eyes wide open. Everything in the house seemed normal. The mother still told me good night, still closed my door gently, but I knew she was waiting. Waiting for me to believe. Waiting for me to fall asleep. Waiting for me to drop my guard. 3 a.m. I heard something. A whisper. Like she was talking to someone in the kitchen. The voice was quiet, but it wasn't hers. It was wet, cracked. I gently opened my door. The kitchen was pitch black, but I saw her sitting at the dining table, hands flat on the surface, still. I backed away, and she turned her head, not like a normal person. She turned her entire head 180 degrees without turning her body. Her eyes were pitch black, no whites. I slammed the door shut, and I knew it didn't need to learn anything else. It was perfect now. Part 7, when the calling no longer stops. I don't sleep anymore. I don't dare. Each night, I lie in bed with my eyes wide open, staring at the dark wooden ceiling, the dim glow of the nightlight casting a faint halo, like a thin layer of skin stretched over a rotting secret. She, or it, still acts like my mother, still knocks on my door each morning to wake me for breakfast, still cooks, still does the laundry, still embroiders as if nothing had ever changed. Only I know. Only me. I tried leaving the house once, called a car to take me back to the city. But when the driver arrived and I stepped onto the porch, she was already standing there. Not angry, not blocking me, just smiling. and said only one thing: "Don't go. You'll miss me too much." And I stopped. I don't even know why. The driver waited 10 minutes, then left. I stood frozen at the doorway. When I looked back, she was still staring at me, unblinking. Her smile lasted a little too long. I started keeping a journal, not on paper. I was afraid she'd find it. I typed everything into my phone, encrypted the notes, set a triple-layer password. Every night, I wrote, "Day 42. Today she stared at me while I ate. Didn't speak, didn't move. Her eyes didn't reflect any light. Day 45. I broke a glass. The shards cut my hand. She didn't react, didn't rush over, just tilted her head like she was studying. Day 50. I lied and said I had a nightmare where she turned into something else. She chuckled. I dreamed you weren't yourself either. I don't know what it wants. I don't know why it hasn't killed me. Maybe it needs me to believe. Or maybe it's waiting for me to forget. Forget that Mom is gone. Forget that this replica is just a perfect mask. Night 58. I tried to leave again. This time, I didn't call a car. I slipped out the back at 4 a.m., walking the old trail, the one where I heard the first voice. I walked fast, breathing hard, my heart pounding. Then I heard her voice. "Sweetheart, where are you going?" Right beside my ear. I turned around. No one. But the ground beside me had footprints, parallel to mine, as if someone had been walking with me the whole time. I ran. I fell. Mud soaked my clothes. When I got home, she was already at the door, holding a towel. "I told you not to go. It's dangerous out there." I didn't answer. Day 64. I woke up and found my phone unlocked. The journal app was open. A new line had been added. I read it all. "You write beautifully." I deleted everything. Changed the password. Useless. I don't know how much longer I can last. This house isn't home anymore. I'm no longer the person I was. She doesn't need to do anything. Just be there. Act like Mom. Care for me like Mom. But every night, every time the lights go out, I hear something whispering in my head. Not a voice, a thought that isn't mine. It's slowly becoming her voice. Tonight, I'm writing this for the last time. I don't know who will read it. I don't know who will believe it. But if you've ever heard a voice calling from your porch, if you've ever heard a loved one calling your name when you know they're asleep or dead, please don't answer. Don't step outside. And if one day your loved one comes back, don't celebrate too soon. Look into their eyes. If their eyes don't reflect light, if they're too perfect, run. Or accept that you've stayed too long. Because I know the calling won't stop. It has finished learning, and now it's looking for someone new to call. It might be why